It all starts on a pitch-black night as lightning strikes right next to a massive castle, where a guy in a raincoat is already locked in a wild fight with a mysterious girl. He was totally shocked her sword hadn't snapped yet, so he braced himself and put every ounce of power into his ultimate attack. He leaped back and faced the girl, who was actually the Demon King herself. He told her he had a quick question even if the timing was weird, and she was totally cool with it. Everything went quiet until the Demon King asked if that was the weird blacksmith's mark, and the guy realized it was that old man's work, telling her they were finally on equal ground since their swords were both just as deadly. She sighed and said fighting was totally pointless, so the Demon King promised that their generation would finally have peace. He asked if she was cool with him spilling the beans to the blacksmith. She didn't mind one bit. After all, if he gets mad at them, it might actually be the best way to... She sighed, knowing he totally saw this coming, and after he said she was right and said goodbye, they both walked away feeling like that blacksmith had completely played them. He was busy grinding away at the forge. Suddenly, someone walked up and told him they were all finished. He asked the boss if he could check everything out later. The owner said sure. Out of nowhere, he turns to the girls and says it's finally time to grab some food, making them all flash a big smile. He watched the girls chat happily with a smile, but then he looked up at the sky and realized it's been a crazy long time since he first started living in this world. It was the day he died, diving under a truck to save a tiny kitten, but he just couldn't make it out in time. He only jumped for it because he's a total cat lover. But just as he was drifting off into the void, a voice suddenly asked if he was finally awake. They said his soul was still safe, but the guy was totally lost and asked what was happening, so they dropped the bomb that he actually died in that other world. He totally got what was happening, but he couldn't figure out why he felt so freezing, especially since souls usually just break down into new energy after something dies. But this mysterious guy has been holding back the process this whole time. He's using all his mental strength to keep his brain from snapping under the pressure. He just wanted to know one thing. She just smirks and admits it's her, leaving the guy totally stunned as she explains she's actually a world watcher who jumps through dimensions to hunt down anything that could wreck the... She was spying on their world in her cat form, but she messed up so bad she almost died until this guy stepped in and saved her. He asked how she could be all-powerful if a truck took her out, but she explained that only her temporary shell died, while the body just keeps living on as a normal cat. Her soul would have been totally fine, but since that guy wasn't meant to die in that world, a massive hole suddenly ripped open. To make up for his death, she was building a brand new creature, but the guy was totally lost, and wondered why she didn't just save him from the accident in the first place. She says this is the easiest way to fix everything, but the problem is she's already seen him die. Everything she sees gets uploaded and saved into the world, and she actually apologized, telling him his death was already locked into the system, leaving the guy totally shocked as he asked what he was even supposed to. She said she hadn't saved this data in other worlds yet and wanted to move it, making him realize she was trying to create a backup for existence, and she just gave him a smirk because... He was super suspicious and asked what her deal was, but she just admitted he died because she wasn't paying attention. It made her feel super awkward, but the guy just sighed and said he totally got it, so she promised to give him a massive head start in the new world to say thanks. He asks what she's talking about, and she promises to teach him how to survive this world and give him a place to call home. She asked him what kind of life he actually wanted to live. The guy took a second to really think about it. He was a total loner with absolutely no family to go home to. He was stuck slaving away as a programmer for a super toxic company. Suddenly, he snaps out of it only to realize he's already an old man covered in gray hair. The only person. He's got nothing left to miss there, and since nobody's ever going to be bored of him again, he's totally ready for a massive second chance at life. He told her he loves making stuff and wants to turn it into a real job, and she promised she could make that happen. He said he's so obsessed with cats that he'd literally die for them and just wants a chill life with his pet. So the girl asked what exactly he was planning to build. He's always been super into blacksmithing, but he never really got the chance to give it a shot. She agreed and decided to max out her physical stats first, putting the rest into language, crafting, and a tiny bit of magic before setting off a massive flash of light. He closed his eyes as she smiled and thanked him, but the second he reached out his hand, the whole world started to vanish. Then, in a total flash, everything just vanished, and he was suddenly standing right in the middle of a forest. The guy snaps his eyes open in the middle of a forest, but as soon as he tries to stand up, a massive headache hits him out of nowhere. Out of nowhere, he felt something super weird as a massive wave of brand new info surged from his head all the way down to his fingertips. A massive wave of memories slammed into his body, making him finally realize why his head was throbbing. His old life was officially dead, and he could only gasp in shock. He let go of his head and breathed a sigh of relief as the pressure finally stopped. He stretched his arms out and checked himself over to see what changed. It was weird, like a massive wave. He finds himself in front of a clean wooden house and heads inside, remembering the girl's advice about finding a place as he scopes it out. The house was totally decked out with furniture and a kitchen full of food, and for the first time in his life, he finally had everything he needed. He notices there's no power, no running water, and not even a well, so they'll have to hunt for water, and he also spots another room. He peeked inside and his jaw hit the floor. This was his workshop, and it was totally packed with every tool and material he could ever need. He grabbed his hammer and his eyes lit up. He knew exactly how to use them and what to do next. Everything was locked and loaded in his brain. He thanked the girl for giving him all that info. This is what he calls priority mode. He was just about to use some magic when his stomach started growling like crazy. It was already noon, so he decided to stop and whip up some lunch. He raided the kitchen and found some dried meat and basic veggies. Since he lived alone, he actually knew his way around a stove. He just had to slice everything up and get it sizzling in the... He stares at his hand and tries to summon some flames, and he's totally shocked when it actually works. It's way too tiny to stay lit for long or get super hot, but it'll definitely come in handy as a human lighter. The food was totally mid, but he shook it off and started hunting for some water. He pulled himself together, grabbed his gear, and tied back his hair to get ready for what was next. He stepped outside to scout the area and marked the trees as he went. But once he spotted a bright green squirrel, he knew for sure he was in a totally different world. He looked around, wondering just how huge this forest really was. He had zero clue if there were any towns or villages nearby, and he didn't even recognize the weird materials These farmers have been working their butts off. He didn't even realize he understood this just as well as his other crazy powers. Suddenly, he just let out a big sigh. He figured this was just more info he'd picked up, but it's still super weird to suddenly know stuff you never actually learned, so he just grabbed some and went with it. He was finally getting the hang of this new world, but the second he stepped outside, his jaw completely dropped. He found a lake about 15 minutes from the house, and while he was getting some exercise, he looked into the fresh water and saw she'd actually made him younger just like he wanted, The guy is about 30 years old. He's got plenty of fish to eat, so he's totally set for food. Suddenly, he hears a weird noise and starts looking around. He scans. He was praying it wasn't a bear, but when he got closer, he found a girl passed out on the ground. He reached out to check on her, but he totally froze when he saw she had tiger ears and a tail, leaving him wondering who this girl actually was. He knew she was a goner if he didn't move her right that second, so he tossed her onto his shoulders and started walking. The girl let out a sharp gasp from the pain. The guy told her he knew it was rough, but she had to stay strong. He pointed out that it was actually way lighter than it looked. He snatched up the sewing kit and just needed to find some fabric. He shredded the canvas to make some quick bandages. Next, he's got to boil some water to clean that needle. He stripped her down to check her injuries. Just like he thought, the worst wound was right on her stomach. Since priority mode was active, he knew exactly how to handle it. But then he had to stitch up the wound with a clean needle and thread, and as he started, the girl let out a sharp gasp of pain, so he quickly apologized and told her it would. A bit later, he gets her dressed and feeds her some soup, noticing she's finally stable after he did his best with some basic first aid, though he's totally gonna apologize if... He let out a sigh of relief that the herbaea he found earlier actually worked to kill the germs and stop the pain. But right then, the girl's ears suddenly twitched. He let out a huge sigh, feeling totally drained, but now he's got to figure out how to survive in this new world as a blacksmith. He's got a massive to-do list ahead. He planned to start the job tomorrow, but for now, he had to keep checking on the girls to make sure they were okay, knowing he couldn't afford to fall asleep. He eventually drifted off right next to her bed, but a sudden scream jolted him awake, and he realized the girl was lifting his head with her paw. She pulled the blanket close to keep him at a distance, and right then, this guy's whole life was about to change forever. He stared at her hands in total fear, but then he realized her grip was actually loose, meaning she wasn't even trying to kill him. He stared at her stomach and finally asked if her wound was okay, but she just stood there in total shock without saying a word. She tells him it still stings but is finally healing up, which is a huge relief for him. But then she looks him right in the eye and asks if he actually saw her. He says he only did it to fix her wound and swears he didn't touch anything else, and when she asks if he's for real, he literally swears on his life. She stayed silent and pulled her hand away, telling him she'd trust him for now, so he stood up to thank her as she mentioned he didn't really have a cent. He asks what's up, and she admits her heart is racing, so he sighs in relief that she isn't awkward and tosses her clothes at her to get dressed. He told her clothes were soaked in blood and he had to rip them to save her, and she totally got it. He apologized, saying he didn't know those things were special to her, but she just brushed it off as old rags and scrambled to get her clothes on. She asks if this is actually his place. He tells her it is. She thinks the house is pretty sweet, and then she asks what he's even doing there. He claimed he was a blacksmith, but then admitted he actually just got to town yesterday, and even though she could tell he wasn't lying, the whole thing felt super suspicious. She's positive there was never a house in these woods, but this guy swears he was hanging out here just yesterday. She says she's hardly ever in this part of the Black Forest, so maybe she just missed it. The Black Forest. She's got the inside scoop on him, and his spot is right on the east side of the forest. She usually sticks to the north or west, but while she was chilling yesterday, she's positive that bear would have shredded her if he hadn't shown up. But he didn't even realize how dangerous it actually was. He got super lucky he didn't get jumped yesterday, and he knew those girls were gonna need some serious time to heal up from their injuries. She says that even though beastmen are way stronger than humans, an injury like this means she's stuck and can't hunt or run through the woods for 2 whole weeks. So the guy asks if she wants to just stay with him for a bit since things turned out like this. She was totally caught off guard, but he explained he'd just moved in and needed an assistant to help him with chores and blacksmithing. He's gonna give her a place to stay and plenty of food until she's back on her feet, and the girl is totally blown away by such a sweet deal. She was totally lost in thought and didn't know how to answer, making the guy get all nervous, but he also thought it was kind of sweet that her tail was twitching. She told him she's staying put until her wounds heal and she can move again, as long as things don't get sketchy, and he just told her not to even worry about it yet. She flashed a grin and told him she'd be in his hands for now, and the guy just smiled right back. He suddenly asks for her name, and she whispers that it's Samia. But even though he thinks it's awesome, she actually hates it and wants something way cooler. He asks if she wants a name like Gonzalez, and Samia just bursts out laughing, wondering what kind of name that even is. He got all flustered when she laughed, but he still told her that her family gave her that name for a reason, and it fits her perfect. She suddenly turns bright red while thanking him and asks for his name, so he tells her it's Azo Tanuya. That was his name, but she was totally shocked he had a northern surname since that's where all the Asians live in this world, so she quickly apologized. Samia told him she wasn't trying to be rude, she just almost never hears last names around here, but he told her it was totally cool. Normally guys with last names are high status and live in big mansions, so it's super weird that Ivy Jozo is running a forge like this. He figured everything would be cool if she just rolled with it, but Sammy could tell he was actually struggling big time. He even asked her to just use his first name, and since Samia agreed right away, he made sure to thank her. He tossed coal into the furnace and said they were ready to go, so ISO decided to start things off with a small knife. First, he uses magic to spark a fire in the oven, and then he has to keep the heat cranked up until the coal finally catches. Next up is wind magic, which pumps in oxygen just like a pair of bellows, and since the fire isn't too crazy yet, he can totally handle it on his own. It was way hotter than when Ezo first crashed, and once it hits 800 degrees, the steel is gonna change color so he can finally start forging. He'd never done this before, but he knew exactly what to do. With the system's special mode, he could tell the gear was ready in a heartbeat. Suddenly, he knew. He lunged forward and smashed it in a flash, leaving Izo totally stunned by his own power, because that hit was straight up unreal. From carrying Samia home yesterday to hauling water earlier, he's way stronger now than even when he was 30. This guy has definitely leveled up. Next, he filed the blade down and hit the grindstone to give it a lethal edge, showing off some seriously impressive skills. He's turning all those lessons into real-world skill, leveling up his body until he's a total pro, and you can see it in every strike of his sword. Anzo was flexing a sharp knife he built with his own 2 hands, and since it was his first creation ever, he decided to test its edge by slicing through some root vegetables. He put so much power into it that he sliced right through the cutting board, and he was totally stunned by the insane thing he just pulled off. Every knife in the house was totally dull. He figured it was all because of some weird special treatment. He needed a blade that could slice through anything like magic. But man, that is way too... Iso thought about using the knife for protection, but instead, he quickly made a pen and focused on exactly what he needed to show Samian. He realized that using his preferential mode would make the knives way too sharp, and he'd never be able to sell something that dangerous on the open market. He's gonna make 3 more knives tomorrow, one that's way sharper, one that's a bit duller, and a final one that's barely sharp at all. He wanted to show Samia first before deciding his next move, so he woke her up since dinner was finally ready. But she totally didn't want to get out of bed. Samia was still totally wiped out no matter how much she slept. So Ezo checked in on her and realized she had to keep moving to get her blood levels back up. Which really. Samiya eyed the lamp and asked if it was magic, totally doubting Iso could even use spells, but he just said it was a basic one while she geeked out over how cool people with. The guy says sleep is a big deal, but eating right is just as important. Lunch was a big plate of fried meat and veggies. Iso isn't much of a cook, so this was. Even in this world, Iso still needs cash for food and supplies, so he told Samiya to go ahead and pick out whatever bed she liked. By the next morning, the knives were finally ready, and Ezo called Samiya over to give him a hand. She stepped out and admitted she knows zero about forging, but he just wanted her to give these knives a test run. He handed her one and told her to get moving, so she shrugged like it was no big deal, and they dove right into the dumbest one first. She pushed down and sliced through that veggie in a total flash, leaving her completely stunned. She was totally hyped by how awesome the knife was and told Ezo he's got serious skills, so he thanked her and had her test out the next one. He starts slicing through that veggie way faster, and Iso realizes this tool makes it a total breeze, leaving the girl completely blown away. Samiya's shocked by how clean his cuts are and asks what's up with that knife. He tells her she's got to try it out for herself. This is the star of. She gave it a tiny tap and sliced the board right under the veggie, leaving her totally shocked. And when the guy told her to try and get him out, she reached down and picked it up super. The girl totally freaked out and asked what was happening, but Ezo told her to chill out before she hurt herself with that knife. She said sorry and agreed, but even though he played it cool since he hadn't warned her, her reaction proved he was right about everything. This priority mode gives him the skills of a pro blacksmith, but he's gotta actually use his gear if he wants to sell it. Samiya asked to buy it since it was perfect for hunting, but the guy told her she could just have it, leaving her totally shocked. She was totally amazed and asked if it was actually real, then gave Ezo a big thank you. He thought the whole thing looked awesome and told her he'd craft a scab. He realized that by lowering the quality level, he could pump out way more knives, and since Samiya was so hyped, he knew they'd sell like crazy, so he planned to craft a bunch of blades and farm tools to finally start making some real money. He heard about a town past the forest with a massive weekend market, and now his blacksmithing business is officially open for business. The guy finished up, Samiya thanked him, and when Iso checked on her, she said she could move fine but wasn't ready to hunt, so he told her they should head to the city tomorrow. A week passes, and Izo's been busy crafting a bunch of knives, hoes, and sickles to sell off in the city. They're just basic models, but since Samiya is healing up great, they've been hanging out, and Azil is finally learning all about the local land and the creatures living nearby. They came across tons of wild plants and animals, and Iso was stoked to see his new knowledge actually pay off right away. He was stressing about running into wolves or wild boars, but Samiya told him to chill since she could literally smell how strong Izo was. This guy knew for a fact that Samiya was way more powerful than him. He felt like he hadn't even reached his full potential yet, but he still thought he was tough enough to. They hiked through the woods for 2 hours before hitting the main road, and with just 1 hour left until the city, Samiya's beastmen vibes kept every monster and bandit far away, making the whole trip super chill. She pointed right at the city. Izo flashed a grin, and it turns out a massive flea market was waiting right behind that wall. The market is right outside the city walls where traders gather every day, and since this town lives for business, you can come and go totally for free. Out of nowhere, the guard turns to the guys and asks to take the question, so Iso flashes a fake salesman grin and asks what he's talking about. The guard didn't recognize them and demanded to know why they were there, so Iso told him he was just a blacksmith. Iso showed up at the flea market to sell his gear, but when the guard checked his bag, he literally gasped in shock. He told the guys they were clear to pass, but warned them to keep things chill and not start any drama. You gotta cough up 1 silver coin just to step into the flea market. He grabs a trading counter and a wooden sign that acts as his official permit. In this place, the best spots are already claimed. Once they get there, they see all the prime spots are totally packed, so Samiya points them toward a seat way over at the end of the counter. Iso looks around and thinks the place is actually pretty cool, then flashes a grin and tells Samiya he's counting on her to have his back today. 2 hours fly by with 0 sales, and even though he's trying his best to hype up his gear, his background as a programmer makes him a total disaster at being a salesman. Samiya mentions it's only noon when that guard suddenly shows up asking about the deal, and even though Iso says things are going south, the guy says he's feeling lucky and the man is totally caught off guard when the guy mentions seeing some razor-sharp knives in their bags, which he really needs since his own blade is completely trashed and beyond repair. He was hyped that the Ezo knives weren't all gone yet, and the seller just smiled while handing one over. The guard could tell right away that this blade was the real deal. After talking to Samiya, They kept the price low just to make sure they actually made a sale. A guard immediately snatched up a knife. This was the first time Isa ever earned money for. The guard said if the knife was actually that sharp, he'd tell his whole unit about ISO, and the guy promised it would be the sharpest blade they'd ever seen. Everyone was grinning, and Samiya could tell Iso was super hyped. He was feeling really proud. But 3 hours later, they hadn't sold a single thing because it turns out nobody actually... The crew was just grabbing their gear when a voice suddenly asked if they were taking off so soon. The guards marched straight up to them, and Iso started freaking out, praying he wasn't about. This scary dude asks Marius if he got his blade from the crew, and Ezio wonders if it's the same young guard from before. The guy smirks and says he knew it was here, asking if they have any knives left, and when a confused Azel shows them to him, the man demands they hand over every single thing. Iso was totally thrown off when the guard mentioned Marius came back from lunch and immediately started flexing his knife. These blades are insanely sharp and totally top tier. Everyone wanted one so bad they were ready to buy the whole shop. The guy said there were only 8 left for 40 silver coins. The guards snatched. Once the guards cleared out, the old man walked up to Izo, who immediately started apologizing for the trouble. But the guy was just shocked and hyped that Izo actually sold every single item. Once the guys finally headed home, Samiya was super relieved they sold every single knife, so Izo thanked her for the help and let her know he'd need some time to rest. Iso is feeling totally hyped and knows he's ready for way more than just basic repairs. And while he's wishing he'd tried crafting a long sword by now, scoring a deal with a merchant would let him finally start selling all kinds of epic gear. You've got to test those farm tools and axes yourself. And after that, he had to build her a room of her own. The girl hits up Iso to see if he can craft some arrowheads. He asks her if she's actually going to use them. She says she'll need them for hunting once. He finally agreed to make them, and Samiya was totally hyped since Tanoya Azo just couldn't resist a good compliment. He's still grinding away at those knives today. But next he's making Samiya's tips by pouring molten steel into clay molds and letting them chill. Edzo asked why they didn't just sharpen the blade first and then attach it to the handle when it was ready. He builds a massive saw for the trees and levels up that axe he was trying to sell, spending all day carving out the teeth before jumping right back into it the next morning. He took a fast swing and hit the tree, but he paused when the axe got stuck, right before a massive crash echoed out. The whole tree got sliced and started rolling down fast, leaving the guys totally stunned as he realized his second life would be over if he wasn't careful. Once the fallen tree is ready, they start hacking it into tiny bits with an axe, and Samiya calls out as the girl says it's finally time to use this tool. Iso's still not 100%, so they've got to stay sharp while they pull a giant saw back and forth to cut through that tree. The tree crashed down and Iso thought it looked just like tofu, making the girl crack up at how weird that was, but Iso told her to chill out because she was shaking like crazy. They finished up in no time, and the guy was so impressed he said they'd easily crush the rest of the work before the day was even over. Samiya said this usually takes way longer and Iso's gear is totally insane, but the guy just stood there in silence. He's only making these insane tools because of what he already knows, which is basically a massive cheat code. But in this new life, he wants to earn his wins through hard work instead. He was super lucky he still had those starter gifts, especially since he's basically just a visitor in this world. He just uses his powers to stay low-key and live a normal life. But one night while he's working late, Samiya suddenly turns to him. He asked what she meant, so she remembered him saying he wanted her to live there. And after he said yeah, Samiya asked if the offer was still on the table. He didn't even hesitate to say yes, and after a quick second, she told him she was super thankful for his help. Even though she was basically useless at first, she had a blast helping him work, chatting over food, and going on walks together. But her absolute favorite thing was just watching him get in the zone and do his thing. That's exactly why she asked if they'd be okay living together, and he just grinned, telling her that if he said it was fine, then it wasn't a problem. Samiya was totally hyped and gave him a massive smack on the back to say thanks, but he yelled that it actually hurt, making her laugh while he finished up. She stared at the tip in total awe, and when Samiya told him it looked awesome, he just gave her a quick thanks. Iso is slowly carving out his place in the world through every little choice he makes, and he's just hoping this is the start of a long run of good times. The city guards were totally hyped to buy the knife and kept asking when Eza would be back to sell them even more. But when the girl suddenly started apologizing, they were super confused and... The girl was totally hooked and asked if she could get a closer look at that knife. Uso handed her the bag and warned her to run home if things got sketchy since she just recovered. So Samiya promised she would and took off while the guy told her not to overdo it. With that finished, he got straight to work restocking the shop, and even started making long swords today. After making sure the molds were dry, he cracked them open to pull out the center, packed them into a barrel of sand, and poured in the glowing molten iron. Once it finally cooled down, I cracked open the clay and pulled out the iron. Then he used a hammer and a file to smooth out all those rough edges before heating it back up to tweak the... He finally grinds and sharpens the blade, attaches the handguard, wraps the handle in leather, and carves a wooden sheath to finish the job. Usually you'd need a whole squad of experts for this, but priority mode lets him handle the work all by himself in the shop. He was totally hyped to create a brand shaped like a cat, modeling it after his adorable pet Dory from social media, and now the first stage is officially finished. They're gonna spend the next few days cranking out basic models and cheap knives, but he forged that sword all by himself. Iso was swinging his new sword around when Samiya suddenly showed up and asked what he was doing. The guy turned bright red immediately. He tried to come up with an excuse but just ended. Izo noticed her face turning bright red and asked what was up, but she just smiled and said she was totally fine and feeling super happy. He totally got it and flashed a grin, while Ezo talked about how awesome it was to have someone waiting for her at home, and Samiya just smiled back in total agreement. Izo was finally getting the happy life he never had in his old world, and when he asked how the hunt went, the girl told him she'd already taken down a tree deer. She gutted him and left him soaking in the lake to stay fresh until morning, then told him his arrows and knife were awesome when he asked about them. The next morning they hauled the deer inside to carve it up, and Sammy showed Iso exactly how it's done while they worked together. Samiya used Iso's crazy sharp knife and her insane skills to skin and carve that meat in a total flash. And just like that, it was over. Samiya said it was super quick. Ezro thought carving it up was a total breeze, and once they finished, the meat looked exactly like the stuff the guy was used to eating. He finally realized that back in the old world, fruit was only sweet, and meat was cut into small pieces because humans made everything easy for themselves. The guys get a fire going to cook up some dinner, and Iso asks Samiya what she did with the animal's guts, so she explains she left the scraps in the woods for the wolves to eat, which the man definitely takes note of. He started chowing down, totally hyped because he hadn't had fresh meat in forever, so the girl promised to catch a bird next time since they're way tastier fried up. The guy grinned and said he'd totally wait, and Swami smiled back because he knew that having tons of good food is the real secret to a chill life. They hauled the leftover meat to the workshop to dry it out, since Izo's been dying to make his own jerky forever. The next morning, Iso tries to be super polite to Samiya, but she just calls him gross, so he tells her she's being mean and asks why she won't help him since. She was totally down for it, and while they worked, he asked her to help clean up the rough edges, which she was super hyped to do. Since Samiya was helping out, they cranked. Larius spotted the crew at the entrance and knew exactly who they were right away. The guard admitted he was getting pretty worried since they'd been gone for such a long time. Iso then explained that Mario spotted Iso rocking some swords today and said he might swing by later to check out the action. Since they were neighbors with that nice guy now, Iso suggested they hit the shops for some salt and wheat, and the girl was totally down for it. He set everything up and told them to just chill out in the nice weather, but then some rich guy suddenly walked up and asked to see his sword. Once Iso gave the okay, the guy took a quick look and was totally blown away by his skills. He says he's buying 4, which totally shocks Ezo, but the guy explains he's just a traveling merchant who wants to keep one and sell the rest later. Iso realized that selling these in other spots could totally blow up their business, so he sold the swords, thanked the guy, and Azo was hyped. He dreamed that one day, once they finally saved up enough cash, he and Samiya would head out on a business trip together. Everyone's eyes are glued outside as Marius brings his squad to help the guy, but they're in trouble because the standard swords are totally sold out. Only one high-end sword was left that Iso refused to sell, and even though he smiled and said they'd made enough to head home, Samiya noticed something was seriously off. She told him she almost never sees a dwarf around here. Ezo stopped to think about that for a second. She explained that they're basically impossible to find in this area. Before this, she immediately asked Iso if he forged the guards' knives, and after he said yes, she eyed them up and asked to get a closer look, which he totally agreed to. She stared at the knife for a bit until her eyes suddenly lit up. Then she turned to Iso and asked to see his absolute best work. This luxury version is on a whole different level, and since Iso was saving it for someone he thought was actually worthy, he's totally shocked that this girl realized he was hiding something even better. Iso whips out a high-end model and tells the girl to look at him, but she just apologizes and raises her blade, staring right at it while Iso notices her hands are actually pretty big for her size, and then the whole place goes dead silent. She's checking the item out from every single angle, while Samiya and Iso just stand there feeling super awkward. The guy mentioned she'd been watching for a long time, and even while Iso was busy with other customers, she just kept staring at that sword, making him feel totally awkward. She lowered her blade and thanked Iso as she handed it back, but the guy just stared at her, looking totally confused. The girl quickly shouted that she had one request, and then immediately slammed her hands onto the ground. She bowed low and begged Iso to train her, and he was totally shocked that she'd actually get on her knees. While hanging at the market, the girl said her name is Reich Moritz and she's super hyped to meet you. There was no way they could ignore the dwarf kneeling right in the middle of the road, so Echo stepped up to talk to her first. He really didn't want Samiya getting stuck in the middle. Reich sets the record straight, explaining that Moritz isn't a last name. It's actually the name of the workshop. See, dwarves are basically just a bunch of families that team up to run a workshop, and anyone born there takes that name as their own. Her name's Reich from the Moritz workshop, and after Ezo introduces himself, she asks if they're from the north, so Ezo explains he's actually living in the Black Forest now. She noticed that and said she was totally hooked because she'd never seen a blacksmith make stuff this cool before she got here. Izoe asked her why she even wanted to be his student, so she explained that dwarves have to start their training at a specific age. He and his brothers ended up leaving the workshop to go. They tracked down the best workshops to learn as students, head back home to craft epic gear with their new skills, and then go right back to the place where they studied. That's just how dwarves roll, and when Iso worried about their secret tech getting leaked, Rick explained that hosting a dwarf apprentice is a total honor that helps them get their legendary skills back. When Rick rolled into the city a few days ago, she spotted a guard carrying a knife that Izo actually made. Since this blacksmith works in the free market instead of the city, Reich lets the brothers go and decides to just wait for the guy to show up again. Izo asks if her brothers already scored a teacher, and Reich confirms they're at their workshop, meaning if Izo turns her down, she's gonna have to find a new place all on her own. S.O. knew it was way too risky for a young girl to be out there on her own. Samya stayed totally quiet. The guy finally agreed to train her, but he had He totally hated her plan to sacrifice herself, so that's off the table now. And since their house is way too small, they're gonna have to build some extra rooms. Third, she's gonna help him with way more than just blacksmithing, and since she's down, there's only one final condition left. He told her to drop the formal act, saying he'd call her Reich and she could just call him Ezo. The girl tells her master she just can't do it, making him totally freeze up, while Reich reminds her she's just a student who needs to show some respect. But Samiya, with the plan finally set, they headed home that evening, and once they arrived, he pointed out the house and the workshop, making Reich super hyped. As soon as they stepped inside, Iso asked how the girls' legs were holding up, since they were lugging around so much gear and clearly weren't used to walking. She said she was strong, making the walk way easier than he expected, and Ezo told her she could finally drop her bags and wash her hands. He thanked Samiya and realized she only took the safe route because she was so worried about Rick, leaving her totally shocked that he even caught on. Ezo was feeling totally over the moon, but when everyone sat down for dinner, she realized there wasn't a spare room for her, so she'd be crashing with Samiya for now. She didn't want to get in their way and offered to crash on the floor so the guys could have the big bed. But Iso told her it's fine since they always sleep separately anyway. The girl was totally shocked they weren't married. Samya yelled that she and Iso weren't like that at all. Reich joked that it definitely looked like it, and some guy wondered if people... Hezo swears it's not like that and says nothing is happening with Samya so far, making the girl totally confused about what he means by so far. Samya turns bright red and faceplants onto the table. Reich finally realizes they're basically a family living in the workshop together, and Ezo is totally blown away by the news. He just grinned and agreed, and man, Samiya was looking at him like he was a total legend. Iso made it clear he was the boss of the workshop, and that the room layout was staying exactly how he said until they could expand, so she kicked off her first day the very next morning. After waking up, they cleared the weeds and dug holes to expand the house, and while Samya went hunting, they stayed with Reich, who's totally shredded and clearly used to this kind. They were making some seriously good time. Samya shouted out that she was finally back. Iso said hey, and asked if the hunt was a success. She bragged about taking down a huge deer. She just wanted to chop some wood, but it sliced through like butter, and she had no clue why it was so insanely sharp. Samya just grinned and said it was a total shock, admitting she was actually pretty freaked out when she first saw it. Yusa was totally shocked she was actually considering it, especially after the guy told Rinka they'd be starting blacksmithing and construction at the same time tomorrow. She was totally down for it, so Ezo decided to finish making a girl's uniform before it got dark, which was honestly a genius move. They all had to team up to carve up that massive tree deer Samya took down yesterday morning. After a quick breather, they got straight to work. They even finished putting together the girls' uniforms. Reich is a total pro who never stops moving, and after working her tail off, They grab a quick snack and get right to forging a brand new knife. Iso was totally stuck on how to teach Rika that elite skill, and Rick noticed his confused face as he walked over. Izo decided to keep it real and apologized, admitting he'd never had a student before and had no clue what he was even supposed to teach her. She happily told Iso not to sweat it because she was locked in and wouldn't miss a single move his hands made. He starts by forging a basic knife for mass production, hammering the steel super fast while Reich watches him work. Once he's finished, the guy says the blade is finally ready to be sharpened, and when he asks Reich if she learned anything, she just smiles and calls him a total pro, even claiming she realized he was totally holding back, and when a shocked Iso asked how she knew, she told him it was obvious he wasn't trying, and his sword skills didn't look anything like they used. Iso said this knife was built for mass production, and since he wanted me to start making them, he showed me exactly how it's done. Then he told Rika she needed to craft one herself. She jumped straight into action, and Iso realized he'd never seen anyone do this before. He suddenly stopped dead when he saw Reich moving. He just stood there watching her in total silence. Then she handed him a knife and asked for his opinion. Izo was actually impressed, telling, "He says the knife is solid, but the power feels a bit off, though he knows it's only going to get better." Izo is 100% sure Reich can make. She was totally down to try, so Izo agreed to make another one for her to see today, and this time he was going all in. The first time he saw a guy forging iron, he realized his special privilege made him a total natural who knew exactly where and when to strike. He can feel exactly how hot and solid the water is. He molds it into any shape he wants while keeping it perfect. But man, this skill didn't just happen overnight. He was deciding which secrets to keep to himself, figuring she'd just copy his moves if he didn't teach her, while Reich was lurking in the shadows watching it all go down. The guy finally finished up and thanked her for waiting, but the second she grabbed that knife, she got the shock of her life. Reich was totally blown away that a regular human could actually build something this epic. Not even a dwarf could pull that off, but Izo offered to give her the knife, so Reich asked if he was actually cool with that. The guy agreed, saying he'd never sell the place because she's his student and basically family. She was so hyped, thanking him and promising to give this shop her all. She happily announced that she was finally done prepping all the meat and hides. Suddenly, she let out a huge gasp. She spotted the knife Rick had just finished making. Izo was right there. Reek spots the guy using magic, but Iso says it's just basic stuff, making the girl freak out while Sammy yells that he's even got a last name. She's acting all proud, and the second Iso says his last name is Tanuya. Reich just claims it as her own, leaving Samya totally shocked and asking what she's even thinking. Rika was totally stunned because that was her master's family name, meaning her full name was actually Rika Tanya, and Iso made sure to write every bit of it down. Izo didn't want his last name on the shop and insisted on just Izo, so the girl immediately claimed she was Reich Izo now. He felt super awkward using his own name even if it was the rule, so Samya shouted that it wasn't fair, and decided she'd start calling herself that too. Iso was totally speechless when Samya asked if she should call herself Samya Tanuya, or Samya Azo. He remembered he was the one who asked her to move in, so he agreed since they're family now, and honestly, everyone was just super hyped. He used to think he was just a visitor in this world who wouldn't leave a trace, but now he finally has something worth staying for. That night, he realized that if Wright can build stuff like that in this world, she's got some seriously insane skills. A blade this sharp was literally impossible to make back in his old world, and now Iso's wondering what kind of crazy stuff his special skill will pull off next. Reich joined the crew as an apprentice alongside Samia, and since they were both such hard workers, Azo finally had the time to focus on his own projects. Their ISO workshop is seriously leveling up and cranking out gear way faster now. Once a week, they hit the market to sell their goods to the locals. ISO even starts spotting some familiar faces. Marius says everyone's been spotting Izo's gear lately and asking who made it, so Izo basically thanks the guards for the free hype. The old man says he'll be back to shop later, and they've got a massive stash of knives, long swords, and spearheads ranging from basic gear to the high-end stuff. This is just a basic mass-produced model that's cheap enough for a housewife to buy, but it's super popular because of how insanely sharp it is. This mid-tier blade is the go-to for anyone who actually knows their stuff, and since it's such a steal, you could easily flip it for a huge profit at a pro level. This brand new model is totally invisible to normal people, and ISO is only selling it to the top-tier elites who are actually good enough for her. ISO poured all their elite power into this sword, making it so dangerous that selling it was a massive risk. But they were totally stuck because it couldn't be an official product unless they actually... Before they knew it, everything was totally sold out, and while Samia guessed the hype was spreading, Reich asked if it was time to go grab more ore. She asked if he had a supplier for his house and workshop since they were finally running out of all their gear. He figured it was worth a shot to ask. Suddenly, someone shouted for them. This guy heard they were all packed up, so he rushed over as fast as he could. Iso thought he was right on schedule. Because of that one super generous guy, they managed to sell out of everything. He was honestly just so hyped for them. Their stuff is a total hit. The guy notices Iso is a total beast at work, but Iso says he's sick of just hammering iron and wants to finally see some silver. The guy said this was exactly what he needed to open a shop in the city that wasn't just some ordinary store, and Iso was totally hyped for him. This guy says he's got some serious connections from his past, and he wants to open a shop where they can sell as much as they want without any of the usual rules holding them back. Iso noticed what was happening, and when the guy asked to sell his weapons and gear right there, Iso just asked if he was actually serious. He knew for a fact that Azo's swords were the real deal, but the blacksmith wasn't even sure if the guy had actually used them in a fight. He realized that just staying. Azo asked if the guy had a supplier, and if he agreed, then they were officially good to go. Camilo introduced himself and said he was hyped to meet you. Then Azo stepped up to say hello too. Camilo said Ezo's skills were so cracked he could survive anywhere, and since he had a beastman and a dwarf backing him up, there was no point in trying to stop him. Wholesale happens once a week, and So promised to give her a heads up if the schedule ever shifts, so Camille totally agreed. Iso suddenly asks for a huge favor since they're running out of ore and coal, but Camilo steps up and says he'll find and buy everything they need. Iso said Camilo was saving their skins, but the guy just said he's taking the cost out of what they're getting paid for the goods. Izo finally tracked down a shop for his supplies, but since they don't open until next week, he has to wait to drop off his gear. And just like that, a week flies by. The thing was absolutely massive and everyone was losing it. Then Ezo showed up and was totally blown away. All his gear was sitting out on display, but Samaya pointed out it didn't even look like it was for sale. And while Iso agreed, Camilo spotted them and called the guys upstairs too. Izo rolled up today with a knife, a sword, and some other secret item. He asked how much they were looking for. The guy straight up told him he wanted every single bit. He said they carry tons of stuff since they sell to literally everyone, so he had to make the whole shop way bigger. Camilo was dying to see how Ezo would handle the custom sword request, but Ezo was so busy being suspicious of the buyer that they couldn't even start without a real order. Camilo asked if Izo was backing out, but the guy said he wanted to pick the person for sale himself. Camilo suggested checking the guy's identity and sword skills so Iso could be totally sure, while the man promised a big reward if he just showed up to the workshop alone. To reach that workshop, he's got to survive a forest crawling with wolves, and if he makes it through, he's definitely got the skills to pull this off. He's letting Camilo vibe check the customer, and if the merchant thinks they're legit, he'll reveal their location, but only after asking the girls if they're down with the plan. Neither of them really cared, so Esso asked if the gear had arrived, and since they were loaded with stuff, Camilo gave them a shout. He led them straight to this massive warehouse Camilo had shown me, and while Azo figured it'd be enough for now, he still had to ask what the price tag was. He can keep the supplies coming non-stop, and when Iso heard the price, he realized it was a total steal at just a quarter of the usual cost, but Camilo told him not to sweat it. Iso thanked the guy, but he had way too much to carry, so he asked Camilo about using a cart, only for the merchant to tell him he hadn't even thought of that. The guy was actually going to trash his old cart, but since it was still in good shape, he told Ezo he could just have it for free since he wasn't using it anyway. He asked why Camilo was being so cool, and the guy just said he's a supplier with a huge future ahead of him. You need a supplier who hooks you up with the good stuff for a fair price, and Ezo better be grateful for the deal he's getting. The guy thanked Camilo for the help, and as they drove back, Aso said the path gets rough off the highway, but he'll make it home okay. The squad offered to clear the road, and Reich knew that would make it way easier for customers to reach them and place their orders. Suddenly, Samia caught the wolf's scent, so they had to stop dead in their tracks and wait for it to finally leave. Iso noticed they keep running into each other just like they did this morning, and since Samia mentioned they're having babies soon, Iso's already hyped to see them with the cubs. Reich wondered if the wolves here were just super chill, but Samaya told him there are so many deer and rabbits around that they aren't even looking for a fight. Reich had his own squad backing him up. Iso figured that being powerful would keep them from getting jumped. The girl wasn't totally convinced, but she really didn't want to risk everyone's soror. She realized she shouldn't be there by herself, so Samia told Rika to just take them outside since these wolves are super smart and way more friendly than the ones from the plains. I wondered if they changed like this just to survive or if they actually evolved. But with wolves and bears lurking everywhere, it's still way too dangerous for Rika to let her guard. That bear that attacked Samia is still lurking in the woods, and it's so dangerous that even a beastman would be in big trouble, making the whole forest feel super creepy. That massive bear finished its meal and just looked the other way. Iso slammed his hammer against the iron, thinking he looked pretty cool doing it. Rank told her she looked way better than before, and she was just hyped they found such awesome materials. So Izu said he trusted her, and they kept moving. They tossed the iron they just bought straight into a magic furnace. It's so clean that it doesn't even leave any gross waste behind. This makes it way better since they can reuse it. Usually this job takes a whole team and heavy machinery, but his special perks make it look easy, and even though he feels bad for the local craftsmen, he's actually just stoked to be working. A few days later, everything finally clicked, so he spent the week working on the house until Samya showed up to see if he was done and ready to go with her. He walked in and saw the roof was totally finished. The guy thanked Reich for all her hard work. She just shrugged and said it was no big deal. Azu apologized for not getting there sooner. While the girls were busy crushing the building expansion, he was hard at work blacksmithing, and they honestly did an incredible job. He figured it must have been tough for them, but Reich reminded him that their strength is way beyond any normal human. They promised to have his back, so Ezo thanked them and told Camillo to go get Bedlin now and handle the rest later. All they have to do is build some doors and furniture. Reich was totally shocked that he actually wanted to put the doors up. He just couldn't wrap his head around her. Reich told her that Samya had no clue her house was actually super weird, and Esso thought he sounded like he came straight from another world. He needs those doors for everyone in the house, and even though Samya asked if he was heading to the city, Iso told her he's staying right where he is. Reich asks what his next move is, and that's when Ezo realizes he hasn't caught a break since the second he arrived in this world. He cared more about a chill life than overworking, and since the shop was making bank, he finally had some extra cash to spend. He decided to take a quick breather, and while they were walking, Samia asked Iso what he really thought about it. He said the river looked awesome, so they decided to stay right there, even though it was a solid hour's walk from home. All he wanted was to chill on a permanent vacation and do whatever he felt like, so he decided to start fishing. He grabbed some string from home, turned a nail into a hook to build a DIY fishing rod, and then scouted for bait under the rocks. He thought the girls would be terrified, but they didn't even flinch, and they just ended up fishing together in total silence. It was a beautiful day, and even though life at the office was finally looking up, Zoe still felt like a total workaholic who couldn't stop grinding. Iso was totally zoned out while resting, so when Samya started panicking, he told her to just chill and let the fish take the bait until he gave me the signal to pull it in. The girl yanks a fish right out of the water. Rick tells Samia to set her down so she can get the hook out, and ever since they started talking, Izo has finally. He was totally chilling, and later the crew sat down for a feast after catching a ton of fish. Iso couldn't catch a single fish, so Samia figured it was because he was way too bloodthirsty. This totally freaked Iso out, but the girl explained that the fish could sense a... They finally crashed to get some sleep, taking a total break where they didn't have to worry about winning for once, because honestly, everyone needs to just chill out sometimes. Half a day went by with 0 fish, and Samia couldn't find anything to shoot, but Ezo says this girl ripped out every organ except the heart and just left them behind. He's demanding to know where the heart is since she showed up empty-handed. But Samia already buried it in the dirt so the forest can bring her back to life. Since that, anything they don't bury gets snatched up by wolves already lurking nearby. And since even animals have their own rules, Izo's time is definitely coming too. This guy dropped in from another world just wanting to fit in with the forest. Azil moved him to a new spot, but he couldn't find a single fish anywhere. The sun was already going. They only have 2 fish so far, and since everyone needs their own, he's having 0 luck. He really wanted to vibe with nature and catch at least one, but Samyo is just... He said that wasn't true, but right then, a fish started biting and he yanked his rod back. He took a second to steady his nerves and yanked the fish right out. He snagged a fish and started flexing, and even though they didn't catch much else, they were totally chilling because the rest of the plan was a huge success. So looked over at the girls and decided that starting tomorrow, he was getting right back to work on building their house. The guys were totally hyped since O told them they crushed it, and now that the extension is finished, the house foundation is finally set. They fitted every new room with windows and doors, then decked out the bedrooms with beds and shelves for all their gear. The girls finally got their own brand new bedrooms. Aso headed back to his spot, and they turned the old study into a cool living room. Today's the big day where everyone... They've got meat and nuts covered, but since they're still buying veggies, Iso wants to grow his own and finally be independent. Those leftover farm tools actually came in clutch, and even though Rick says she's no farmer, it turns out the master really knows his stuff. Samya was totally on board. Izo started mixing his old world memories with everything he learned since being reborn. It was fine if he acted a little bit strange. There were still some secrets. Ever since he got dropped into this world, he's been totally passed out at his desk. He's still stuck with his lame office worker skill, and he absolutely hates it. He had no... Someone was wandering through the Samia Frost forest, and when Izu asked what was up, the girl told him that a visitor had just arrived. Suddenly, someone starts pounding on the door, yelling that Camillo sent her for a sword, and since she's being way too loud, Azo finally opens up. Iso greets a girl named Helen, and she asks right away if he's the guy who made Camillo for the shop. Iso introduced himself even though he thought she was super annoying, letting her inside as his very first guest, so the rest of the guys could finally meet her. The guy asked if she was all by herself and Helen said yeah. Then Ezo checked if the wolves jumped her, but they hadn't even touched her. Finding this place was a total struggle, but she followed the smoke right to it. Ezra realized she was so powerful that the wolves were actually too scared to get close. Then, the girl she had to trek through the forest all alone to reach the workshop, and since she actually pulled it off, Izo agreed to forge her a weapon and asked what she wanted him to make. She whipped out her knives and revealed she's a mercenary who's done this 1,000,000 times, but now she's looking for a real challenge. You can't exactly stop to clean your gear in the middle of a war zone, but if her weapons fail her now, she's dead meat, and these 2 daggers are all Everything is covered in scratches from non-stop fighting, and Iso is the one who built all these weapons and gear. If you use one of his swords, you're winning the fight no matter how strong the enemy is, but his weapons always cause nothing but pain, and Iza is definitely not going to just sit. He didn't want to turn into some cold, unfeeling jerk. He thought the swords were actually pretty awesome. Iso even said the blacksmith who forged them was a total pro. Once Helen gave, even the girl agreed he was the real deal, and she told Helen she made the right call by reaching out to her master. Helen agreed since even the dwarf was on board, but when the guy asked how she'd use it, she was totally lost and asked what he meant. Izo wanted to see how her sword actually worked in a real fight, but the girl said it was too hard to explain and decided to just show him instead. She stood up to show off her moves, and Iso was totally blown away by her insane speed. He noticed she used one hand for balance and the other to strike, and since Helen was bored training alone, she challenged Iso to a real fight. He told her to take on Samia since she's got more battle experience, but Helen thought the guy looked way more dangerous. Samia couldn't even argue with that. Iso figured he had 0 fighting experience in this new world, but his body already knew exactly how to throw down. It was like his muscles were on total. Iso thought she was just showing off and wouldn't go all out, so he told her to chill, but she wasn't playing games and went for a real attack. Isaac blocks the hit and goes on the defense, but Helen is moving so fast he's barely keeping up. She was moving like a total blur, and right as she seemed to trip, Helen admitted he was actually pretty decent. The guy was desperate for a breather, but he knew if he lost focus. Staying on the move 24/7 is a total nightmare. He was dodging her attacks like crazy. The guy froze up, wondering if she was actually just kidding. After they both collapsed from exhaustion, the guy was just relieved he survived, and when Helen called him tough, he asked if he should have just focused on her movements, but she told him everyone calls her the lightning sword because she's way too fast for them to handle, and she actually apologized for getting a bit too carried away. He finally got the hang of it and said he'd be done in 2 days, so she should come back on the 3rd. She asked if it was time to head back, but when Ezo asked what she was up to, she told him she just wanted to keep their fight going. Iso told her he couldn't make a weapon under those conditions, so she just asked to watch him work his magic instead. Iso was totally lost and said it'd take 3 whole days, but even though Helen was staying, the guy started getting really nervous. He suddenly remembered the guest room was already prepped, so he looked at the girls and told them they had no other choice. Helen thanked him with a huge slap on the back, and just like that, the Azile workshop officially landed its very first customer. Right after meeting with Helen, he decided to power through the rest of his work as fast as he could. Samia walked up and told him she'd already finished with them, so the guy turned around and just told her to leave them in the corner. She flashed a grin and said she'd go fix up her arrows, but then Iso called out her name, making her turn back to see what was up. The guy told her she was getting way better, and as soon as he thanked her, she totally blushed with joy. Samia was just vibing and doing her thing. On days when she wasn't out hunting, she was busy helping Izo in his workshop. Her main job was casting metal and smoothing out all. He kept grinding away, hoping that one day she'd finally pick up a hammer and work right beside him in the shop. Helen was totally locked in, watching every single move Isle made. A bit later, the guy takes a breather and calls everyone in the house for dinner, and you know Helen, Samia, and Reich were totally hyped to go eat. Helen told everyone she was shocked to see a massive deer on her way over. But Samaya warned her those tree deer are actually a major threat, so Helen promised to stay on guard. She grinned, remembering that bear she saw way off in the distance, and as soon as Samiya and Isofros heard that, they all reached out to touch her stomach. Iso kept wondering if he was getting any closer. Helen could tell something was off and asked him what was up. That's when the guy dropped a bombshell. A bear attacked Samiya, and Helen looked worried as she nodded, but she insisted she would have totally won if her weapon wasn't so busted. Yuzo warned her not to do anything crazy, because even for a beastman like Samiya who lives in these woods, this monster is seriously dangerous. He warned her that if things went south, they'd never find Helen, and even though she was caught off guard, she just smiled and said she totally got it. Iso slapped himself to get focused because this was his workshop's first ever custom order, and he was going to pour his entire heart and soul into it. He grabs the metals and fires up the furnace, while Helen gets ready for tomorrow's adventure by taking Samiya into the woods to show her how to hunt. He's picturing how Helen handled those blades yesterday while he heats the iron and hammers it down to make it perfectly flat. He makes sure the metal is super strong, and using his divine eyes, Eso can see every tiny grain hidden deep inside the iron. He chops it up to make sure every piece is perfectly even, so keep your eyes glued to how the master does it. He pours the molten metal into the mold, turns to Reich to say he's gonna test its strength, and asks her to grab a basic short sword while she shouts for him to wait and sprints. Iso stabs a basic sword into a tree, grabs his new blade, and takes a massive swing at it, and even though it gets stuck for a second, he pushes with all his might and... He let out a happy sigh and said the sword was perfect, while Reich looked at him in total awe because there wasn't even a single scratch on it. The guy took one look at the other sword and said it was officially off the market, making Reich ask what he even meant by that. She asked if just sharpening it would fix the shape, but Iso said the quality would totally tank, and he refused to sell something that wasn't perfect. The guy suggests just fixing it up for home use, but Reich says her master is way too stubborn, and Iso Grandin totally agrees. The girl just laughed, thinking about how stubborn and honest the master was, especially since he was always so dead serious. Even with all that insane power, he was still being super careful and focused. He was finally getting closer to that goal he's had for ages. Iso was honestly just so hyped to see. After grinding for hours, he finally finished carving his mark into the hilt, wiped his sweat, and held the sword high, hyped that the first one was officially done. Reich was totally blown away and begged to see the sword up close, so the second Iso said okay. She grabbed it and held it high. Reich scanned every tiny detail and turned bright red with excitement, and after Iso noticed she didn't miss a thing, he asked her what she thought about it. Reich froze as she stared at the sword, realizing that nobody gets this good just by having natural talent. She apologized for the past but told him the whole North is losing a legend with him gone, and Iso was honestly shocked she was hyping him up this much. Reich owned it and told him he was exactly right. Right then, the guy finally saw that she wasn't kidding. He realized she was the real deal, and her power was way. He goes totally overboard with his power when he has a plan, and this time he made the steel so crazy strong that it actually can't cut through the stone. If he just focuses on making it razor sharp, it might actually work. And since this weapon is already crazy powerful, he's wondering what would happen if he used something way better than... He can forge a weapon that's both super tough and razor sharp, and he totally could have pulled it off. One mistake could ruin the owner's life, but the real nightmare is how much damage this weapon would do if it fell into the wrong hands. Iso was totally drowning in all this new pressure, making Reich worry she'd actually upset him, but he just told her he was stuck in his own head. Reich turned bright red and looked at the master in total confusion, while Enzo decided he wasn't going to get mad about something that hadn't even happened yet. He told her to wrap things up for the day and she agreed, but he knew he'd have to think twice before taking his next order. He's honestly just hyped to have Reich as his student, because if Reich can make something people actually care about, it means he's doing just fine. Out of nowhere, Samiya and Helen burst into the room with a massive haul of supplies. They shouted that they finally found the herbs needed to treat separation, specifically some summer sour and summer. Out of nowhere, Samiya hits up Ezo because the wolves are acting super sketchy today, and she's positive Helen spotted a massive black bear, so Ezo makes sure to keep that in. The girl was super on edge, but the guy told her he totally understood, and that they should just sit down for dinner, so they both shared a smile. The room went silent as Ezo realized he had to keep Samiya and Reich safe while watching his own back, and by the next morning, he was already back at the forge hammering away. It's day 2 of the job, and this time Helen is tagging along to watch, but she thinks the whole process looks way too easy. Reich hyped up the master, saying they only pulled it off because he works at insane speeds and does a perfect job. Helen asked if Reich could pull off the same move, but the girl admitted she might never reach the master's level even if she practiced for her entire life, leaving Helen totally shocked that it would. Iso wanted to be hyped about the compliment, but it actually stung because he knew he only had that power thanks to Magatus. He glanced at Helen, thinking about her nickname, while Iso gave a proud grin and said both swords were finally ready. Helen was super hyped to test them out right away, but Ezo stopped her and said it was way too late, leaving her totally shocked when he told her to just wait until tomorrow. Ezo apologized for making her wait and told her she'd have to hang on until tomorrow. She wanted to argue, but she didn't really have a choice and had to agree. Samia was totally hyped and said it looked amazing. Isle got all awkward and told her she was overreacting. Helen asked if those were the raspberries from yesterday, and the girl had no clue. Reich says her parents barely ever do this, and since Azel just finished his very first custom job, they're going all out to celebrate. Samia and Reich both hyped Iso up, and he thanked the girls for being such a huge help with his work. Helen was totally stoked to congratulate them, and Iso even gave her props for placing the order, making everyone super thankful as she flashed a smile right before the guy told them to dig in while The next morning, Helen checks out her new sword and says it fits her hand perfectly, which makes sense since she was way too hyped to even sleep, and now Izo wants her to give those blades. Helen swung her sword like a total pro, chaining all kinds of moves together with super smooth and perfect form. The boys were totally hyped, and after Helen gave a tired sigh and said it was cool, she suddenly dropped her swords and bolted, leaving Iso completely stunned. She squeezed him in a tight hug, telling him she was super glad she actually asked. Iso said he was happy with it, but a second later he's screaming because her grip is way too strong. He starts coughing like crazy, claiming he was just testing her power and promising he'll fix everything if things get messy. She just needs to head to Camilo's or stay put, and after Helen agreed, she started asking about the price, but Ezo told her to just pay whatever she thought was fair. The girl was totally panicking because she had no clue about the prices, but Iso just told her he'd take whatever she was willing to pay for the job. She was totally lost, but when the girl offered Iso 2 gold coins and a silver, he snatched the payment right up. Helen had no clue if she was getting a fair price. She paid a bit more than last time, but she still felt pretty uneasy about it. Iso told her the original swords were top. Ezo bragged about her insane grip to hell and left, while Samia and Reik had to use every bit of their power to save him, and even though the girls said they were screaming, they were finally ready to just go back to their normal lives. Reich made sure they were packed with plenty of swords and sharp blades. Then, only 2 days later, it finally happened. Samia runs over to the main character and heads inside to report the news, but Iso sees she's back way too fast and knows something definitely went down. The girl warns him a black bear showed up, and the hero immediately asks if she's hurt, but Samia says she bolted the second she saw it. She warns him the bear probably tracked her scent with its crazy good nose, and while our hero is relieved everyone's safe, he starts figuring out their next move. He realizes the bear is way too close, and the guys might run right into it on their way to the city, and he knows if Samia or Reich get attacked, they don't stand a chance. Azo tells the crew he's heading out for a bit, grabs a spear he crafted himself, and leaves Samia totally stunned as he heads off to take down that bear. The hero tells her to lock up the house and workshop while he's away, but Samia insists on going with him, and he shuts her down fast because he's not sure he can keep her safe. He tells her he knows what's going on and promises he's not dissing her archery skills, but he thinks it's best if he just handles this whole thing solo. Izo realizes his body was moving on pure instinct after fighting Helen, and even though he skipped the bear, he knows he could have taken it. Then the girl begs him to come back in one piece. Reich suddenly begs him to come back in one piece, and the hero promises he will, because there's no way he's leaving his family behind to die. Izu heads out into the woods, leaving the girls behind to lock the door and start stressing out. Reich starts praying with her hands folded, and seeing this, Samia joins in just to keep herself. Our hero spends some time traveling down the road. The weather starts looking pretty rough. The wind kicks up and it starts pouring rain. Iso is heading straight for a place that feels totally dangerous. He usually lets Samia handle the scouting, but with a massive black bear on the loose, even Ezo's cheat senses are starting to freak him out. The rain washes away his scent and muffles his footsteps, giving him a real shot at winning since the beast can't track him, and suddenly Ezo remembers something that makes him smirk. He remembers dying just to save a cat in his past life, but now he's actually taking on a bear, proving that even if Iso's body is different, his soul is still exactly the same. But things are way different this time around. Now he's actually got people to protect. Right then, the faces of Samia and Wright flash through his mind. Iso remembers being a lonely nobody in his past life, slaving away at a toxic job with nothing to show for it. But now he's finally got family and friends who actually love what he creates. Our hero tells himself to snap out of it, But suddenly he's face to face with a massive black bear, so Ezo levels his spear and gets ready for a showdown. The bear starts creeping up and stands on its back legs to look even bigger, letting out a nasty growl that makes our hero realize he's in for a massive fight. Iso says sorry and tells him it's nothing personal, but then the beast lunges, and our hero realizes this massive bear is actually way faster than it looks. If that beast even grazes him, it's game over. Izo sidesteps the attack and jams his spear into the bear. He realizes right away that he barely did any damage, and the bear screams in pain and goes totally ballistic, and just as the hero tries to back away, he gets smacked so hard he can't even block and goes flying back. Iso slams back first into a tree, but the pain just makes him furious enough to refuse to die, because he's got a brand new life and a whole new world to protect. He's not letting anyone mess with the happy life he's built with his family. Izo charges the bear and lands a massive hit. The beast roars even louder, but our hero, he takes a second to think about what he's living for, then drives his spear straight through the monster's head. Our hero announces his victory just as the massive bear's body crashes to the ground. Ezo sees the beast isn't moving or breathing anymore, so he figures it's dead and walks over to grab his spear. Our hero realizes Samia was actually right about his weapon being way too sharp and awkward, so he just flops onto the ground to take a breather. He admits that taking a life for the first time had him shaking like crazy, and even with priority mode active, this fight was a total nightmare for our hero. Iso sees he's totally beat up and covered in scratches, but he's just hoping nothing is broken as he stares at the bear, wondering what to do with it. Our hero decides he's gotta eat and bury his kill, but first he has to drag that massive beast back home, and Iso is seriously doubting he can pull it off. The rain keeps pouring as Iso struggles to haul that massive beast on his back, and even with all his muscles, he admits this bear is seriously heavy. Our hero notices the rain is finally starting to let up. He's actually hoping some wolves or thugs jump him so he can get into a fight. But looking at the path ahead, Iso pauses to look around when he hears a rustle, and suddenly, someone tackles him to the ground and yanks him back by the leg. Suddenly, our hero spots a girl who's totally fuming, and when he sees Samia baring her teeth at the bear, he has to tell her the beast is already dead so she can finally chill out. Her face totally drops in shock and she quickly backs away to ask if he's actually okay. But he tells her that even though everything hurts, nothing's broken and he's gonna be fine. Iso looks over and gives a little smirk, making Samia freeze up for a second before she totally bursts into tears. Right away, the girl starts bawling and screaming about how glad she is he's alive, and just as Iso is getting confused, Samia suddenly tackles him into a hug while still totally losing it. He starts patting her head to calm her down and tells her it's all good. But then he hears a noise, spins around, and sees a new girl who asks if she's interrupting. Iso realizes it's Reich and tells her she didn't get in their way. But then she suddenly shoves her face right into his chest, making him scream because that old bruise is still killing. Rick says Sumaya noticed the hero was running late and bolted to find him, and since her friend couldn't just leave her hanging, she decided to tag along too. Our hero is stressed about the danger, but Reich just smiles and says she couldn't let Samia go alone, especially since the sense of Izo and that black bear got totally mixed up, making the girl freak out and set an ambush because she thought something went horribly wrong. Suddenly, the hero and the bear show up looking like one giant monster, making the girls totally freak out, and when Iso hears the story, he completely gets why Samia was so scared after He tries to say thanks, but Reich tells him Samia is the one who really helped, so he thanks her for caring, and she finally starts to chill out. Izo tries to pull away, but Samia is glued to him, and he quickly realizes he's no match for that raw beastman strength. Our hero lets out a massive sigh and tells the girls it's time to head back, and once they agree, he finally gets Samia to chill so the guys can start lugging that giant bear carcass home. They stashed it in the lake to grab tomorrow, but once they got home, the hero was so exhausted he could barely stand, making the girls freak out while Reich started dinner and Azo went to chill in his room. The hero rips off his shirt and starts writhing in total agony, making Samia freak out until Iso steps in to tell her everything is actually fine. Tears start welling up in her eyes as she asks if he's really okay. But he just tells her he's fine and needs a moment to pull himself together. Suddenly, he hits his absolute limit and starts crashing hard, so he tells the girl to wake him when the bath is ready, but his eyes just slam shut right then and there. The hero passes out and leans right into her chest, making Swami totally freak out and start panicking. She sees Izo is totally passed out and chills out, gently stroking his head and telling him she's so glad he's finally back home. Isaac eventually wakes up on something soft, but he suddenly panics because he never washed up and jumps out of bed still wearing all his clothes. Our hero looks around and realizes Samia is standing right next to him, but she lets out a massive scream that totally shocks him, so he just says good morning, and she actually says it back. He figures he just passed out from being totally exhausted, and while Samia agrees, she awkwardly mentions Reich's weird warning that if he doesn't stay dressed, bad air will get into his body. They teamed up to get ISO onto the bed, but right then, Reich herself walks in and sees that the hero is already wide awake. He agrees and says sorry for messing with him, but she tells him it's no big deal and brings over his clean laundry. She spills that Samia actually suggested the whole thing, but then she suddenly stops and tells her to zip it. She begs him to keep quiet, but Reich says it's totally fine, leaving our hero surprised at just how shy Samia really is. The girl uses breakfast as an excuse to drag the others out of the room so our hero can finally change his clothes. He thinks it's just going to be a totally normal day, but the guys head out to the lake to grab the bear carcass, haul it back home, and start carving it up to stuff it with veggies. They start frying it up, and since Samia's never tried bear meat, she asks if it's actually good, while the hero thinks it looks totally mouth-watering. The story picks up right as our hero realizes there's no bathroom in the house, so Samia and Reich have to boil water and use a bucket just to wash their hair and stay clean. Ezo just dives straight into the lake whenever they go to get water because it feels so good. And even though the girls haven't complained yet, the hero is still totally stressed out. While Reich and Izo is busy cleaning up, Semya gets back with the news. But just as he's giving her props and turning around, he sees something that leaves him totally speechless. Our hero spots a girl covered in mud holding some loot and asks what's up, so she explains that the area where she hunted that beast has been a total wreck since the last king ruled, which Izo sees she's way too dirty for a rag to even help, and since Rick agrees, he tells her to just jump in the lake even if it's a total hassle. Samia starts begging him to stop, promising she'll just dry herself off later, but our hero points out she's gonna soak the bed sheets, and even though she screams it'll be fine, he's not budging at all. The hero notices dirt in her hair, making Samia freak out and scream that she's never swimming in that lake, but then Reich jumps in and says she'll join if Samia goes. The girl is completely stunned, and Reich points out she hasn't been outside in forever since it's way too dangerous to go solo, but she's sure she'll. Nobody listens to her, so Reich tells the hero they're taking off, wishing them luck, and feeling stoked that they actually got Samia to go for a swim. The girls hit the lake and dive straight in, with Reich shouting about how amazing it feels while Samia tries her best to fight the vibe. The girl notices and asks if she really hates the water, and after she admits she's not a fan, Samia says she usually just dives head first whenever she's out grabbing her. She admits she's not really used to taking baths, but Rike notices her hair and fur are always looking flawless, so Samia explains she spends a ton of time brushing and wiping. Reich is blown away that she looks so perfect with zero effort and calls her cool, making Samia blush as she tells him he's always looking sharp too. Rick says the workshop is basically a total sweatbox, so she hits the water to cool off. But since she can't make the trip solo, she dragged Samia along for the ride today. She says thanks, and when the girl tells her to just give the word if she ever wants to come by, Samia promises she'll be right there to take her away. Reich suddenly moves in to wash her hair, but she starts screaming that she doesn't need any help, and even though the girl says she watched the younger kids and tells Samia to relax, Reich finally gets his way and sets the girl down in the shallow water. She starts brushing her wet hair and humming a little song. The whole vibe is so chill that it actually makes Samia feel totally. She barely remembers being a kid, but this brings back a feeling she hasn't had in years, so she just closes her eyes and soaks it all in. They finally make it back home, and the hero is totally hyped to see them, with Reiki shouting that they're back while Sakamiya just stands there with a big, satisfied smile. Izo asks if they're freezing, but one girl says the fire kept them warm, so he tells them dinner is finally ready, and they get even more hyped. Next, the hero uses his wind magic to help the girls dry their hair, calling it his super-secret hand-drying move. Later, the group heads back to the house where Samia runs into a major struggle. She has no idea how to hold a spoon. The MC asks what she's doing, and she suddenly... Samua says she's out because Iso holds his spoon all wrong, and the hero is totally shocked she's making such a big deal over something so small. She notices he's got some serious skills with his silverware, and tells him she wants to copy his style, even if it's going to be super tough to learn. Wright suddenly approaches her and offers to train together, telling her to open her hand and pinch the spoon between her thumb and finger. The hero is just standing there with a huge grin on his face. He realizes Wright is such an awesome teacher because she grew up in a massive family. But honestly, Iso didn't. The girl tells Samia to grab her middle finger, and the hero is totally convinced that Reich is going to teach them a ton of stuff. After a bit, she finally figures out how to hold a spoon, and the guys start cheering her on. Then dinner kicks off as our hero serves up their usual bowl of soup. Samia sits down and tries the food with a totally blank face, but the second it hits her tongue, she's screaming about how amazing it tastes. She tells Iso the soup is better than ever, and since she's acting totally normal, he points out that food always hits different when you're actually happy. Finally, everyone digs in, and Reich realizes the soup tastes way better than before, with the hero totally agreeing as he realizes they're actually starting to feel like a real family. The girl tells her brother she's gonna hide out in the Black Forest since a blacksmith lives there, so he hands her a letter for a merchant who knows exactly where to find the guy. We're back at Camilo's shop where he promises our hero that his loot will definitely sell. But then he suddenly asks if the rumors are true about Guardian Marius finally returning to the capital. The hero gives him a quick thanks, but Camilo warns that something is definitely wrong in the capital, and figures that's exactly why the Guardian showed up. The guy warns Ezo that it's better to stay in the dark, so Ezo just assumes the info was free since no one mentioned a price, and then they finally head out with the cart. Just then, a girl sprints toward them, but the hero sees the enemies blocking their path, and realizes they're about to get caught way sooner than he thought. Samia spots the group too, and while Azo thinks they're just bandits, she can tell it's a total brawl, so he sends her in to see what's really. The girl takes off running, and the hero yells that they'll catch up soon before he and Reich finally head out. Iso grabs the cart and bolts after Samia, but soon he spots two girls fighting someone way off in the distance, so he pulls out his weapon and decides to just let Rick handle the... He dives straight into the fight asking what's going on and drops one aggressive guy, but this makes another bandit lose it and charge, though Samia manages to shout a warning. Our hero hits him so hard his weapon snaps, and with that guy finished, he locks his eyes on the very last enemy left standing. The girl nails him with an arrow, and the hero tells him he's the last one left before turning to the mysterious girl to ask if she's okay. He asks her why she was attacked so they can explain the bandit massacre. But then he realizes her face looks super familiar, and wonders who she actually is. The girl thanks the guys and introduces herself as Diana Amor, explaining she was leaving the capital when some dangerous people started hunting her down. The name Ezo proves she's a legit rich girl from the city who isn't lying, so now he's got to figure out what to do with her. The hero warns her the guards are definitely coming and tells her to hide, which she does to buy them some time, and he's totally right when he guesses Diana is heading straight for that person. Iso heads into the forest and lets Rick handle the cart. Then he asks Samia for help and says he's sorry, but she tells him it's totally fine. He finally realized today was the first time he used his weapon for real, and he was totally locked in to keep his family safe. Ezo doesn't feel bad about what he did at all, so when Samia catches him leaning over the body and asks what's going on, he just shrugs it off like it's... The crew decides to head home, but Ezio stops Diana first to ask who she's actually going to see. She says this guy just moved to the middle of nowhere, and her big brother was the one who told her. She suddenly remembers this guy is actually a blacksmith, leaving the hero totally stunned as she explains her brother wants him to fix the weapon he originally made. Everything clicks when he realizes this guy is her big brother, so it makes total sense why Diana looked so familiar to him. Ezo nervously asks if her brother is Marius, making her wonder how he even knows that. And right then, our hero realizes the whole conversation is still about him. She finally tells Diana that she's the girl her brother was talking about. Diana is totally blown away by the news. Our hero gets why she's shocked, because honestly, it's... Back at the house, Esso spills the beans that Diana had a letter from Marius for Camilo, and was set to meet a guy who'd take her right to the hero. He thinks the brother is a total weirdo for handing his sister over to some old guy in a dangerous place, but Diana suddenly cuts him off to ask for their names. Our hero introduces himself and his family, then tells Diana they've bought enough time to hide out together before the guards catch up, and she's totally down for it. As soon as they arrive, our hero unpacks his stuff and starts cooking, and with Sammy keeping a sharp eye out, they don't have to worry about anyone messing with them. Ezo shows her to a bedroom that's way too basic for someone like her, but she's totally chill about it, and just in time too because dinner is almost ready. Diana is loving the food, so the hero tells her to sit down and dig in, but her screaming about how good it is totally catches the guys off guard. She says sorry for being so hungry, but Iso tells her that enjoying a good meal is the secret to surviving the hard times, and Diana is just super grateful they finally let her join them. Our hero is just trying to understand her and help out, but once they finish eating, he finally asks why she really ditched the city. Azo explains how they'll keep Diana hidden, so she finally trusts him enough to open up about her family. Diana explains that her dad, Count Amor, rules the entire region including Camilo, and along with her brothers Leon and Carol, they're the only 4 kids in the family. Leon was set to be the heir until things totally flipped, and now he's hitting the border with his dad to wipe out a massive demon army. Their army got totally wrecked, and with the Count and his heir dead, Marius rushes back to the capital where he starts digging and finds something super shady. She remembers hearing that a monster wiped out the army, but there's zero proof, and the injuries on the Count and the heir definitely weren't caused by claws or teeth. Diana's sure these are definitely blade marks, and as she wonders who actually wins with her dad and brother gone, all the suspicion lands right on her second brother, Carol. The hero asks why, and she explains that since Carol is the son of a mistress, the throne actually belongs to Marius because his mom was the official wife. She explains that Carol's mom died right after he was born, so Marius's mom felt so bad for him that she raised him exactly like all the other siblings. She admits she had no idea what was happening until the disaster struck, and now the hero realizes that if they don't fix this inheritance mess soon, he's going to lose his. He's running out of time and she's staying dead silent, while he can't believe that Diana's own brother is the one actually hunting her down. He finds out Marius is actually the Count's son, and not just some random soldier, so the hero decides it's way safer for the girl to just stay with him for now. Diana gets super embarrassed, which makes the other girls cheer, especially after Ezo tells them to hit him up with any questions they have. Diana admits she's hyped to work with them, but then the hero jumps in and says they should stop being so stiff and just talk like friends. She agrees and starts calling Iso by a new name, while the guys keep celebrating their awesome new family member. Morning rolls around, and our hero realizes his life is totally different now as he remembers the girls teaching Diana how to handle all the chores. Ezo finally gets to work, and Diana jumps into the workshop right beside him. She changes into her work gear and says she's stoked to help out, so Ezo asks Samia to give her a hand. He grins seeing her work since she actually remembered his lessons, but then he realizes Diana is way tougher than your average noble girl. Reich mentions she saw her with a sword yesterday and thinks she's a total pro, and as the sun starts to set, the guys finally decide to call it a day. Iso gives her props for finishing her first day, but then she notices their swords aren't even on the same level. Our hero says the long sword is just a basic version while the short sword is a total luxury model, and when Diana asks to see it, he's cool with it, but warns her the handle isn't actually finished yet. The girl grabs the sword and her eyes suddenly spark, making the hero realize she looks just like Reich did at the very beginning, while Diana screams because she can't believe what she's seeing. Reich walks over and sees she was totally shocked by the swords too, and she explains that only a tiny group of blacksmiths in the capital can actually pull off work like this. He starts wondering how good the local blacksmiths actually are, but since there's already a mix of cheap and expensive gear, selling his top-tier swords won't even make him stand. Out of nowhere, Diana turns to Iso and asks if he'll train with her, and even though he's totally shocked, he finally realizes she's actually a legit fighter too. She admits she probably can't beat Iso this time, but she's dying to see that moment again, and the hero finally realizes she's talking about when he saved her, figuring there's nothing else fun to do here anyway. He tells her he can only do this once since it's getting dark, and as she thanks him, he starts to realize Diana is definitely not just an ordinary girl. They head outside and the hero notices she's actually vibing with that sword, even though he purposely picked out the basic ones to keep everyone safe. The girls are all talking about how Iso is way tougher than he looks since people always sleep on blacksmiths, but he thinks they're just overhyping him. Diana finally squares up, and the second the hero tells her to bring it, she charges in and starts stabbing him with her sword. He manages to block her hits, but he can tell her moves are super sharp and way better than any normal fighter, even if she's still not quite as strong as Helen. Simeon notices Izu is finally locking in, so he busts through her guard and switches his sword to put her in a really bad spot. He sheathes his sword and thinks he's finally the one, and Diana nods while gasping for air, but the hero is so wiped out he admits he's really not used. She suddenly asks if he was holding back, and he admits he was since they weren't fighting to the death, making her realize she's still totally outclassed. The hero shouts that she's doing awesome, and while she realizes her new title is the Rose of the Arena, he tells her she's only doing a decent job. Out of nowhere, Samia jumps in and says there's no hope, admitting she'd lose to Izo 100 times in a row, which leaves him totally shocked and confused. She asks if even a beastman is no match for the hero, and once she realizes she's right, Rick mentions he's so powerful he fought Helen and didn't get a single scratch. Right then, he remembers Helen was totally holding back, and as the tension spikes, he realizes priority mode might be his only chance to survive. Diana remembers Helen calls herself the Lightning Sword, and the hero totally agrees. But when she asks if he actually stood his ground against her, he admits he only lasted about 15 minutes. The girl screams that it's been way too long, explaining that Helen earned the nickname Lightning Sword because her sword possession was so insanely fast it made her a legend among the nobles. The hero realizes she's way too powerful and wonders how he's even alive, while she figures out he didn't just make swords for Helen. He actually fought right beside her. She goes quiet out of nowhere, and right as Ezo tries to head back inside, Diana drops her sword and gets on her knees, begging him to train her and leaving him completely shocked. He shoots a wicked glare at the girls who were just hyping him up, making them feel totally awkward, right before he notices that Marius's sister Diana, the girl he's supposed to protect, has suddenly dropped to her knees in front of him. He spots her pose and realizes Dogajaza is actually still around, so he agrees to the deal as long as she hits the books after work. He warns her that he's not a pro and isn't great at teaching, so she'll have to learn just by watching him, and she starts thanking him right away. She starts jumping for joy while the other girls cheer her on, and seeing this, our hero figures she was probably a total prankster back home, making him feel seriously bad for everything Marius had to. He tells Diana to stop being scared and just call him master, and since she's down, he's officially got a second student, even if she isn't a blacksmith, which definitely makes. Diana kept helping out at the shop from then on, and every evening, the guys started sparring with wooden swords they'd made for training. Back at the courtyard, the girls see the hero training Diana, and realize she's actually a total pro with a sword. Iso's convinced this is the best move for her, thinking this competition is the perfect way to help her level up. He says it's just like learning blacksmithing, and he's doing this because there's no way he can teach girls everything on his own. Now they can finally stand on their own 2 feet, and our hero is starting to feel like he's actually making a difference. The story starts with Diana sprinting away like crazy. She's desperately trying to get away from someone. But then, an arrow flies out of nowhere and almost takes out her legs. She skids to a halt and looks up to find Samiya chilling in a tree. Then later, when the guys finally get back, our hero spots them right away. He's about to hype them up for coming back when he suddenly freezes in shock, noticing a totally drained Diana standing nearby. And when he asks what happened, she just tells him she's completely. Samiya explains she asked Diana to be a beater, and our hero realizes her job was to track the prey and drive it right to the archer, though Diana admits this is way different from hunting in the capital. Samiya is super hyped because she just took down a massive deer, but the hero sees how exhausted Diana is from all that running, and decides to cancel training so they can finally chill. She agrees it's the best move since he's in such rough shape. Then Ezo offers to handle the deer the girls hunted together, and Diana's actually hyped for it. The next morning, the guys head into the forest to start butchering their catch, and it's a huge reality check for Diana, who's only ever seen meat served on a dinner plate. The hero puts himself in her shoes since he's been there before, noticing how surprisingly chill she is for a young girl. But then she suddenly realizes the deer was just alive and starts feeling super sad. The hero explains that this is just the reality of how they get their food, and looking at him, the girl realizes he looks exactly like her grandfather. Reich suddenly asks if that's just a northern way of thinking, but the hero says he doesn't know about other places since he was raised to believe that every single thing has a soul. Samiya thinks they look like beastmen. Diana wonders if the forest has a soul, and the hero says everything is alive, from the grass and wind to the sun and even the fire they're using. He tells her that to live with them, she's got to be grateful just like his grandpa always said, and she really starts to think about it. Iso explains they put their hands together to thank nature and the chefs, and when Diana mentions it looks like a prayer, the hero totally agrees. Samiya suddenly suggests they do exactly what they did at Iso's house, and Reich is totally down for it. But then she points out the hero was already doing it on autopilot, which actually catches him by surprise. He decides they should give it a shot together and suggests heading home to get lunch started. Back at the house, the guys chop up the meat and start frying it. Then our hero plates the food and makes sure everyone is ready to pray before they all sit down and fold their hands. Cut to the Amor house, where Moria sits down and starts stressing hard about his brother Carol. He thought his brother would lead the family after their dad and brother's funeral. But when they found out it was impossible, Carol was so mad he almost snapped. Marius remembers that was the first time he ever saw him act like that, and right after Carol left, he stood up against the succession, which is when everything started going totally wrong. Marius started finding fake evidence meant to ruin his name while dodging non-stop assassins, but he didn't even break a sweat since he easily cleared his name and could definitely hold his own in a fight. He messed up big time by dragging Diana into this, and after what just happened, there was no way he'd let this guy keep going on a rampage. To end the war for good, Marius decides to trust just one person, but he's still freaking out wondering if they can actually handle it. Now we're back with our hero, who peeks out from the bushes to make sure the coast is clear before heading downstairs to finally find exactly what he was looking for. A few days after Diana arrived, Isa headed to the city to deliver his goods, fixed up Camillo's letter, and filled him in on the whole situation so they could figure out their next move. Turns out Camillo knew exactly what was going on, and even though he didn't want to drag our hero into this mess, since Diana is in his care, he's already stuck in the middle of it. Camillo just smirks and admits he's got a point, and since the hero remembers he owes Marius big time, he decides he's gonna do whatever it takes to find him the best blacksmith around. Iso found a secret spot in the woods right off the road to swap messages, and after hitting up Marius, he's already got a letter back. Our hero rips open the letter and is totally shocked to see Marius telling him to pack his gear because they're heading to the capital first thing tomorrow. Once he gets home, he fills the guys in on the plan, saying Ezo is heading to the capital tomorrow while the three girls stay behind. Reich asks what to do with the forge, but the hero tells them to keep working since she's already a pro at using the warehouse bellows to handle the fire. Ezo points out they've got stacks of food so the girls stay full. Samia's down to go hunting if things get tight, and our guy finally realizes he's got a real family to back him up. Diana suddenly apologizes for dragging him into this mess, but Ezo tells her it's totally fine since he actually owes her brother a favor, so they're just calling it even. Our hero decides that's enough news for one day since they've still got a ton of work to finish, and the girls are totally down with that. Morning finally hits, and our guy is already staked out behind a tree hunting for his target, so when he hears wheels rolling closer, he knows they've arrived and peeks out to see. The guy tells Iso to hurry up and get in the cart, then explains he has to hide inside a box so nobody sees him, and even though Iso agrees, he's really starting to doubt. Ezo flips the box open and realizes it's actually built into the cart, giving it way more room than he thought, so he just grins and says he gets it while the guy calls it a classic merchant trick. Our guy jumps into the box only to find it's way too small, but just as the cart rolls into town, Izo finally wakes up. He wakes up to a ton of noise and realizes they arrived while he was totally passed out. Then he hears someone shout that they missed the last wagon and need him to drive the next one. Ezo starts freaking out as they hit the capital's checkpoint, but the guard just assumes the driver is a merchant with goods to sell. The guardian asks to search their gear, making the man and the hero totally freeze in fear, but he doesn't find anything suspicious and lets them right through. Once they're finally clear of the checkpoint, he lets out a huge sigh of relief, only to realize his entire body has gone totally numb. SO is worried his body is too stiff to even stand up, but as soon as he gets the signal to leave, he pops open the drawer and starts stretching out his totally numb limbs. The merchant says he totally gets how rough things have been, but then the hero suddenly stops and asks where they even are. He looks around and realizes he's in a blacksmith shop, but then a voice confirms it's the Amor family forge, making him spin around in shock to see Marius standing there. Seeing him in his new look, he's totally convinced the guy is a legit noble, and Marius explains that this is where they forge and fix up weapons for the soldiers. The man hauls the cart and horses away, leaving the guys alone, and Marius points out it's been a long time since they last met, which the other guy totally agrees with as the guy tells them they're in a huge rush, so he cuts to the chase and Marius asks the hero to forge him the absolute best sword he's ever made. Our MC realizes the guy needs a custom model and agrees to help, but when he asks why, Marius reveals that his family's precious heirloom sword was actually stolen a few days ago. The guy asks SO if he knows about the Amor family drama, and after SO says Diana already filled him in, Marius realizes his brother Carol is probably the one who... Our hero asks why he's being recruited, and the guy reveals that his brother will use the stolen family treasure as an excuse to say he's not fit to lead the clan. Marius thinks Carol is just faking the search so he can pretend to find the sword later and prove he's the rightful heir. The hero asks why, but Marius says they're out of time and should just pretend the stolen sword was a fake all along. He tells the hero to forge the Amor family sword, but the guy tells him to hold on and asks if this thing is really going to be a family heirloom. Marius says he totally gets it, but our hero wonders if he's actually cool with that, especially since he just remembered that even though everyone calls that sword a relic, it wasn't. He explains that the king gave them that blade as a gift, and since rumors say the world's best blacksmith forged it, Iso starts putting the pieces together. A guy bursts back into the room and says Helen showed him the sword the hero made, and he's totally shocked because almost no other blacksmith in the world could make something that epic. The guy figures the hero can handle it, but then he realizes he's never even seen this sword before, so if he tries to forge it, it's gonna look nothing like the original. Marius tells him to chill since they hardly ever use those things outside of secret ceremonies. But then he notices the archives only tell his story, and don't say a single word about what he actually looks like. Marius promises everything will be totally fine, so Izo finally gives in and takes the job, making Marius super hyped as he thanks him. Then the hero tells him to just chill and talk normally, asking Marius to speak like he did back in the city since he's totally not used to all this formal stuff. The guy says he's gotta show respect to the person saving his family, but the hero just tells him they're even since he's the only reason he can even do business in the city. Mario suggests they stop being so formal, and since ISO is totally down, the two of them finally agree to keep things casual. Our hero thinks the blacksmith should probably talk to the future count, but he realizes being blunt is way better than acting all fake and polite, so Marius just heads back to his sword. He thinks Carol might try to expose their lies, but if she does, they'll just put the fake sword and the real one side by side to prove it. Then he says if the hero's sword is stronger, it'll prove the king gave it to him, and as he flashes a creepy smile, the hero realizes just how dangerous this future count really is. He reminds him that they're basically out of time and asks if he can start working right this second, and ISO says he's ready to go. He swaps his gear and decides it's finally time to pay Marius back. But the hero warns him that magic is banned in the Amor Forge, so he'll have to light that fire the old. Luckily, ISO's power gave him all the info he needs to handle this easily, so he just grabs the right piece of iron and starts hammering it out on the anvil. He hammers the iron until it's glowing red hot, buries it in some bark and barley to catch fire, and then finally shoves it onto the hot coals in the furnace. He realizes he's got to pump the bellows by hand to get the fire roaring, and after checking his progress, he's hyped because everything is going exactly as planned. He's used to using magic mechs in a furnace, so he knows they made her job a total breeze, and now he's grabbing his best piece of iron to get straight to work. Everything was going great for him at first, but once he started forging again, he realized things were feeling off. Iso figures it's because of the new hammer, so he's thinking about. He remembers this is a custom model, so he just locks in and focuses way harder. By cranking up his concentration, he finally gets the sword into the right shape. Now he's moving straight into. He finally finishes all that sharpening and polishing, but when he gets the finished blade, he realizes it's totally different from what he had in mind. Back at the workshop, everyone's waiting for the master to get back while Samiya thinks about the hero leaving, remembering how she looked him in the eye and told him he better come back in one piece. He totally agreed with her, and those words stuck with Samiya until someone suddenly yelled that the hero was actually okay, making her jump up and turn around to see it was true. Samiya screams that she's not worried at all, but Diana realizes the stress makes sense since she's the one who dragged ISO into this mess and feels totally guilty. Suddenly, Samiya screams that she's actually way more worried about Diana, admitting she knows how much family means to a girl, even if she doesn't totally get it herself. This really hits Diana in the feels, and next we're at the forge where our main guy is working hard, trying to figure out why his results keep changing every single time. Iso knows his workspace is always changing, but he wasn't even trying to make a special sword when a guy suddenly walks in and sees he's already done. He notices Iso glaring at the sword like he hates it, so he asks what's wrong, but Iso just snaps that he's not done yet, even though the guy thinks the blade looks absolutely perfect. He tests the blade on a huge stack of harnesses, and it slices through them like butter, making him scream in total shock at how insanely sharp it is. Iso thinks this sword looks totally top tier, so he suddenly reaches into his bag, and when the guy asks what he's doing, he just pulls out a knife. He takes a knife to that same stack and slices through it like butter, leaving the guy totally stunned while our hero realizes he was actually wrong about everything. Camillo is totally stunned because the cut didn't make a single sound, but Iso just says he's used to dealing with sharp stuff like this. Now the guy finally gets why the hero doesn't take normal jobs, because this stuff is way too dangerous for a rookie, so he decides to give sword-making another shot. Camillo asks what happens to the sword that's already finished, and the hero tells him he can just take it at a discount, making Camillo finally realize that ISO is a legit blacksmith. A bit later, he crafts 2 more custom knives that still aren't as good as the top-tier ones. But as he holds them both, he starts wondering why they feel so. He notices the knives he made at home are actually glowing, and he realizes they only shine like this when he puts his heart and soul into making them. He starts wondering how he's supposed to get that same glow with the gear he's got, and honestly, he's starting to think he's just gonna fail. He tosses the knife into the fire until it's glowing, smashes it into bits, then wraps the pieces in a wet cloth and buries them under straw ashes. Our hero melts everything down into a glowing puddle and waits for it to cool so he can forge a single ingot. Since he's short on supplies, he decides to just toss his own knife into the. He heats it, cuts it, folds it, and smashes it with a hammer before doing it all again, and ISO is going to repeat this 15 times before the real work even begins. He pushes his focus to the max to land perfect hits and shape the blade, but as he keeps hammering away, he realizes the metal feels totally different than when he first started. He picks up the sword to check it out and sees it's finally finished, so he grabs a chisel to carve the patterns that turn it into a powerful relic. Azo remembers Marius saying this relic sword was the Amor founder's badge of honor, so it's a massive deal for their whole family history. Our hero knows calling this a fake would be a total insult since it's way more than just a sword, and he's not about to ruin something this special. Iso is forging a brand new blade that's just as powerful as the old one, being extra careful not to let it warp or weaken since his family's legacy is at stake. He finally snapped out of his work only to realize the knight had totally collapsed without him noticing. But at least he finished the sword and made it look awesome. He hid a fat cat emblem under a leather wrap, leaving a cool little Easter egg for anyone to find later. Finally, he decides to call it a night since he's totally wiped out. He finished the main mission, so he'll just deal with those knives tomorrow. The sword is finally done and Marius thinks it looks incredible, while Iso admits he had to pull an all-nighter just to get the scabbard finished. Out of nowhere, the guy drops into a fighting stance and starts swinging his blade, and while the hero and Camillo watch in total awe, the hero realizes his moves are exactly like Diana's. Maria admits it's the best sword he's ever held, and while the hero brags that his gear is always top tier, Maria realizes there's no way he can call. Marius thanks him and tells him to get some sleep, so the hero figures he's finally heading home tomorrow. Iso woke up and started getting ready to head out, but then Marius randomly showed up, told him to throw on his costume, and dragged him away. Marquis Menzel asks if they want his final answer now, since he heard Lord Corel already gave back the stolen sword. Nahiro explains this guy owns the mansion and was best friends with the old Count Amor, right when Carol drops the news that he actually returned the relic at the border yesterday. Marquis Menzel decides the matter is settled and names Marius the heir, but Carol shuts him down, saying he's not worthy since he let the relic get stolen. Our hero sees that things are finally going down just like he thought, and while the other guy thinks it's all good, Marius suddenly shouts that the sword they found is a total fake. Carol's jaw drops, and the Marquise is totally stunned when the guy whips out another sword and claims he's holding the real deal, leaving the man demanding to know what's actually going on. Maria checks her dad's old files and finds out the Emor family keeps a ton of extra swords for ceremonies and all kinds of stuff. He suddenly hands the scroll to the Marquis and explains that the title goes to whoever brings the real sword, and after proving the handwriting is Amor's, the hero is shocked by how perfectly this guy planned everything out. Camillo suddenly winks at Ezo, and it finally clicks who else was behind this, just as Marius reveals they found the document right when his brother left. He says sorry for the late warning, then the Marquis asks a totally confused Carol if he's okay with this, promising to tell the king everything if he doesn't speak up right now. Carol swears there's no way it's a fake, so the guy who was totally shutting him down finally agrees to give it a look. He asks Marquila if they can head out to the courtyard, and once they're there, the guys slam both their swords deep into the dirt. The guard starts wailing on the sword, but his spear suddenly snaps in two. The Marquis realizes there isn't a single scratch on the blade, proving it's a gift straight from the king. Carol screams that this can't be real, so the guy offers to prove his sword's power right then and there. Marius says they don't need to do that, so he grabs a sword he knows is strong and slams it against another blade, leaving everyone totally stunned. The guy brags that this sword is sharper than anything else, and the Marquis totally agrees, while Carol backs away in shock before gritting his teeth in pure rage. The Marquis picks Marius to take the crown and heads off to tell the king, just assuming everyone is totally down with the plan. Carol's just standing by the broken sword when the hero spots something super weird, and suddenly he screams and lunges at his brother with a hidden backup knife. Marius saw that move coming from a mile away, so he grabs his sword and slices Carol clean in half, leaving the guy to cry about how unfair it is right before he kicks the bucket. Marius apologizes for making a mess in the garden, but the Marquis tells him not to worry since he only took out a liar and a thief, even calling him Count. Our hero realizes that Marius is officially a count now, while Carol is being treated like a total fake and a thief. The man says they're finally done and heads back inside with the guy following him, but Marius stops to give the hero a super annoyed look before Iko and Camillo trail behind them. Marius finally became the Count, but since Carol totally trashed his reputation, he had to meet with Lord Menzel to figure out their next move. To keep Curl's death and his crimes a total secret, the Amor family had to move fast, snatching his body and burying it deep in the cemetery. Things start getting super flirty, but then our hero catches the maid giggling behind his back and asks her what's so funny. The girls notice he's digging the outfit, and even though he jokes about looking like a basic city peasant, he admits he looks awesome in them, and the girls totally agree. Our hero heads into the room with Marius and Camillo, feeling like a total fake in his new clothes, but the guys swear he looks exactly like a high-class noble. The guy thanks the hero and Camillo for the help and gives them a small reward, even if it's not much since things are pretty rough. The guy says he's down to keep helping, so Marius asks Izo what he wants as a prize, and Izo reveals he's just looking for info on rare ores. He brings up mithril as an example and the hero totally agrees. Then he tells him to hit up Camillo since Marius is the one holding all the intel. Suddenly, the guy remembers something and tells ISO to just take this item without asking any questions, and even though ISO hesitates at first, he ends up grabbing it anyway. Eventually, He snaps out of it and heads back into the dark forest to grab Diana for the new count's big party. After getting Azo to the right spot, Camillo treks back through the woods with his torch in hand until he finally catches sight of his house. It felt like he'd been gone for a lifetime, and he missed his family like crazy. But 3 girls were already waiting for him right there on the porch. Everyone cheers for Izo's big return, then they all head inside to sit down while he spills the whole story. Diana gets hit with a wave of sadness as she remembers how Carol was always so nice and played with everyone, and as she starts crying, she just can't figure out why it all had to end like this. She starts sobbing while the girls try to calm her down, but our hero is stuck thinking about the new Amor family sword he just made, the same weapon that actually killed her brother. She starts apologizing for the tears, but he tells her it's totally fine to let it out. He promises to keep Carol's death a secret, and tells her this is the place to finally just break down and cry. Diana thanks him, and the hero says he'll take her to the estate tomorrow morning since he's heading to the celebration too. Rick figures he'll be gone for a few more days and says he's sorry, but she tells him she can wait just fine. Unlike Samia, who starts screaming her head off. Their bickering actually makes Diana stop crying and start cracking up, and seeing her happy finally puts a peaceful smile on the hero's face. The next day, Izzo hits the town with a girl and hops off the cart to shake her hand, but she's totally not into those formal vibes. She spots Marius and dives into his arms, right when Camillo speaks up to say he explored the city and found a ton of different races living there. He then explains that the city gate is proof the old kings actually made peace with giants, and the hero is totally blown away. He thinks the elves live in the city too, but the guy says they never leave their village, right as Marius shows up and apologizes for making them wait. Our hero realizes he looks totally wiped out, but he's got a massive day tomorrow meeting the king and hitting up the big celebration. He steps inside thinking he's totally free until tomorrow, but then a worker pops up and tells him Diana is calling for him right now. Iso heads out to the garden and sees she's ready for a rematch, so he decides this is the final lesson and agrees to take her on one last time. The girl and the hero start throwing hands, but they eventually get gassed and back off until Diana suddenly demands that he stop holding back and fight her for real. The hero actually goes along with it even though he's totally shocked. But just as the girl gets ready to fight, Iso suddenly puts a sword to her throat and takes the win instantly. She's totally shocked because the attack was so fast she didn't even see it. But Iso notices her getting stronger every day and convinces her that if she keeps training, she'll eventually reach the top. Diana starts cheering and thanking him like crazy, and seeing her smile actually makes him feel all warm and fuzzy inside for a second. The next morning, Marius fills the king in on everything, and after a massive party, he's officially named Count Imor. The hero said the party was absolutely epic, and when Marius toasted to his family's future, everyone started chugging their drinks. Right then, our MC was brainstorming some tasty meals for the girls he'd just met, but Diana suddenly showed up and started gushing over how amazing the food looked. Our hero is totally stunned by her look at first, but then he hypes up her dress and tells her she looks just like a rose. She tells him to stop being so cringe, but he's being totally real because he knows he might never see her like this again. Suddenly, a bunch of guys swarm her with questions, and our hero doesn't get another chance to talk to Diana for the rest of the party. Morning hits, and it's time for everyone to say their goodbyes, so our hero tells Marius to be an awesome leader, and Marius promises he will. But then Enzo realizes that Diana is... He finally reveals the real relic and says he stashed it in the cart so the hero can fix it later, and the hero totally agrees to repair the sword and bring it right back. But the guy tells them they can't have the sword and insists the hero keeps it. Then Marius suddenly remembers another gift he has for Asiso. They toss everything into the cart and head to the right spot, and since the guy thinks Azo can handle the forest hike on his own, Azo totally agrees. Camillo mentions the luggage, and as our hero reaches for the box, he realizes it looks way too familiar, so he rips the lid open and finds a girl he knows hiding right inside. He realizes it's actually Diana, and his jaw drops in total shock. She confirms it's really her, making him freak out even more. It looks like his family is about to get a... The hero asks what she's doing back there, and she hands him a letter from her brother saying their big plan was a total success. Azo figures out Diana is in on the secret but keeps reading anyway, while Maria explains that since the girl's situation changed, he's handing her over to the hero to avoid a... Everything finally clicks, and he spots a tiny note saying he can do whatever as long as she's cool with it. But he decides to play dumb and act like he never saw it. He realizes getting her back isn't going to be easy, so he offers her a brand new home instead, and she starts jumping around like crazy because she's totally down for it. They head out, and while Diana starts overthinking everything, Iso tells her straight up that if she had gotten in his way, he would have sent her packing right then and there. He calls himself a stubborn, clumsy blacksmith who's too honest to lie and tells her she should just keep moving forward. Diana smiles at Izo, but he suddenly tells her to drop the formal act since they're family, and she's totally down for it. She calls out Ezo's name to let him know she's finally home, and he just smiles back and welcomes her back. The crew gets back home to find a surprise waiting for them, and while Reich sees Diana and thinks their plan was a total success, the hero is completely lost on why she's even doing this. Suddenly the girls start whispering, and it turns out Reika and Samiya are part of the plan too. Our hero tries to get the scoop, but they just tell him it's a girl. Iso's forage officially welcomes Diana into the family, and life is nothing but good vibes as they spend the next week building onto the house to make more room. As the building finally wraps up, the guys are super hyped, and when Diana says she loved working together, the hero asks if she's gonna test it out today. She agrees, so Izo hands her a gift, and she's totally shocked to find a custom knife made by the hero himself inside. He explains that everyone in the family gets their own knife as a total tradition, and after Diana says it looks awesome, he offers to carry her stuff to her room. He realizes he still needs to grab some bed sheets, so he plans to hit up the city tomorrow, and after a quick dinner, the guys finally call it a night. The next morning they hit up Camillo's shop, but when the guy spots Diana tagging along, things get super awkward for our hero. He notices the shop is getting crowded and complains that Camillo and Marius are making him work way harder, which basically confirms Diana has arrived. He says he's teamed up with the Count, so business is totally blowing up, and then he remembers the hero was looking for something weird, or... Ezo remembers it too, and then he hears Maria say a Poitkara is hitting the capital soon, which is honestly a huge shock. He realizes this is that legendary metal only found in the north, so when Camillo offers to keep a Poitkara for him, the hero totally agrees. The guys head out to grab some food, and the hero explains that the girls were actually grinding while he was away, so now they've got plenty of stuff to sell, which is exactly why ISO calls them total geniuses. Out of nowhere, she starts yapping about hunting for metal, but our hero knows it's a total waste of time, and right then, he spots a group of adventurers. Everyone thinks he could do way more than just blacksmithing and actually travel the world if he just had another power. Samya suddenly interrupts thinking Iza wants to travel, but he tells her no way because he was literally born for someone else. Samya just gets up and bails, and while Reich thinks about how the hero is always acting like this, he notices everyone staring at him until Diana finally admits she gets super worried every time he leaves the house, and she's sure Samia feels the exact same way. He finally realizes he's gone from the past for good, and promises he'll never leave his family, which makes all the girls super happy. The guys finally make it back home, but the hero notices Samia is totally spaced out, and after she warns them a huge storm is coming, ISO decides to grab some extra water for tomorrow. It finally starts pouring rain just like Samia said it would, so the board guys team up to get those metal sheets ready. Diana's shocked they're actually doing it themselves, but when the girls brag about being the strongest ones there, she tries to hold it in before totally bursting out laughing. The rain was still pouring the next day, so our hero tells everyone to build basic models, while he crafts his own custom knife using the metal he melted down in the capital. Out of nowhere, the girls start staring at ISO while he checks out the sword, but he feels eyes on him and whips around to see who it is. Wright starts geeking out over his skills. Diana decides to back her up, and after Samia calls the knife a total masterpiece, the hero gives them a big thanks. Then he reveals that since he couldn't get a sword made in the city, he actually turned an old knife into a brand new blade. He realizes everything he makes in this place turns out way better. He's super relaxed in this forge, so he just goes wild and does whatever he wants. But he's still determined. The rain kept pouring for days while the guys stayed busy forging new gear, and just when it felt like it would never end, the sun finally broke through. The girls rush out to soak up the sun, and Samuere says that since the rain finally stopped, it's time to go hunting, and everyone is totally down for it. Our hero sees Samia is super hyped as usual, and Reiki figures it's because he's finally living with them. He says he's glad she's in such. They head over to the forge, and the hero notices that working with Reich makes the hammers sound just like music, and he can tell she's totally feeling the same vibe. After a bit, he says it's time to wrap things up and grab some food, and as Reich sits down with him, he asks her if she wants to go for a walk. She thinks about how she spends every single day stuck inside the forge and almost heads out. But she realizes this life actually fits her perfectly. The hero's cool with her answer. She thanks him for looking out for her, and they head back to the forge where ISO decides they've done enough for the day. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door asking for ISO, and he recognizes the voice right away, sprinting to open it. A girl suddenly pops up and mentions it's been way too long, and our hero tells Helen he's actually really hyped to see her again. She walks into the forge and the hero thinks her sword is busted, but she tells him it's fine and she just wants a quick checkup before she heads out camping. Everything finally clicks for our hero, and when Helen hands him her weapon, she claims she uses it all the time, but he notices it's barely even scratched. He pictures her swinging them around since his blades are basically unbreakable, and after that sword saved her life, she decides she's gotta go thank ISO. He brushes off her thanks since it's just his job, telling her the blade will last a long time even though he's still gonna fix it up. He's just about to start working when Helen asks if she can watch, and when he says he doesn't mind, she starts jumping up and down with excitement. Iso jumps into action while the girls watch his every move, realizing the sword is actually in great shape and only needs a few tiny scratches buffed out. He hands the sword over to the girl, and she's absolutely hyped with how it turned out, but while he says it's basically brand new, he's actually shocked she can even feel the difference. He asks if her scabbard needs a fix, but she says she's totally used to it, so he just moves on to the next order. He notices Helen is still hanging around and thinks she's just a fan of his work, but she tells him she grew up watching her dad work as a saddler. The girl had to leave home even though she still wants to watch her dad work, and when she asks the hero if he wants to know why she left, he tells her it's totally rude. He's down to hear the story as long as there's good food, but just as he's finishing up work, Samyat and Diana suddenly burst through the door. They finally meet Helen, and Diana is totally caught off guard, trying her best to play it cool while staring right at the legendary Sword of Thunder. The hero tells Helen to skip the payment and just spar with Diana, and while she's super confused, she agrees. But ISO tells her not to go all out. While the girls head out to practice, the hero starts sharpening his gear, and with Wright promising to watch over them, the training finally kicks off. The hero finally finishes up just as Reich calls an end to the training, and right on cue, an exhausted Diana and a super hyped Helen show up at the door. The hero asks about her skills, and Helen says she's got the basics down but her moves are a bit messy, though she'll totally nail it if she just gets some time to practice. Ezo thinks that's a super honest take and exactly what you'd expect from a battle-hardened pro, while Helen adds that Liana is actually pretty tough for a guy from the palace. She asks if he's the one training Diana since their moves are basically identical, and he's totally shocked she remembers his fighting style after just one match. Out of nowhere, Diana asks if Iso really lasted 15 minutes against her, and she's totally blown away when he says Helen was the first person he ever fought using 2 weapons. Out of nowhere, she challenges him to a fight, but he shuts it down by saying he's just a blacksmith, and it's getting way too dark, so he offers her a place to stay for the night before they head to the city tomorrow. As the sun comes up, the crew finally hits the capital, where the gate guard recognizes Ezo and gives him a shout-out before noticing Helen. The guy is stunned they're actually friends, and after seeing his wild crew of a mercenary, beastman, dwarf, and noble, he demands to know who he really is, but Iso just claims he's a simple blacksmith. Once they hit the city, he tells Helen he's heading to the shop and says his goodbyes. Then the guys swing by Camilo's store to drop off a sick new halberd. The hero tells him to sell it to the Count to make things easy for the guards, so the guy agrees but mentions he hasn't met Kara yet, and has one more secret to share. He whips out the mithril to show Izo and asks him to forge a rapier, then gets the green light to hide his secret emblem somewhere on the blade. The hero says yes, the man puts all his trust in him, and Izo is totally hyped to finally move past boring steel and start working with some brand new materials. Everything went down in a tiny wooden house, specifically in the section where the blacksmith shop was located. The girls are glued to Izo as he gears up in his blacksmithing outfit, holding a piece of ore and getting ready to show them how to finally master mithril. This dwarf had never seen anyone work with mithril before, especially not at home, and she was totally hyped to see what kind of crazy secrets she'd learned today. Everyone else was hyped to see him take on that mithril ore. He didn't mind the crowd watching him at all, and then the black-haired guy geared up and got ready to start working. Iso didn't waste a second, tossing the ore onto the burning coals since he knew mithril was way different and needed a special trick to melt compared to normal metal. So, this blacksmith from another world started forging mithril ore, but he kept the temperature a little lower than what he'd use for normal steel. Iso slammed his hammer onto the mithril, but when he lifted it up, he saw something he totally didn't expect. A hit like that would usually bend normal steel out of shape, but this mithril didn't budge at all, and there wasn't even a single scratch left on it. So the guy kept hammering away at that chunk of mithril. Every single swing was totally perfect and on point. The dwarf just stood there, completely blown away by his skills. Then, out of nowhere, he was totally shocked by how stubborn mithril was, because even with his legendary hammer, the metal cooled down so fast he could barely get a few hits in. He wasn't even mad about it, and deep down he was actually pretty hyped, because even though he knew it would be a total mess, he really wanted to take down Mithra. Normal blacksmiths aren't nearly good enough to handle Mithril's wild energy. They just don't have the skills to pull it off. But Ezo just smirked it. Ezio had never seen such a weird material since arriving in this world. But he refused to quit and kept working until he finally mastered that metal. Iso was definitely struggling, but he wasn't about to quit when he had his broken cheat power to carry him to the top. The other girls had no idea how complicated this really was. They just watched Ezo with total respect. For them, it looked like he was just playing some awesome game. Ezo kept, but he actually had a plan to fix this mess. The dark-haired guy finally tapped into his power. Suddenly, his eyes started glowing like crazy. Iso's special eyes let him see exactly how any material was built on the inside. He noticed that the mithril was super smooth, unlike the rough and uneven texture of steel. Because he could see, this sharpens his focus so he catches every tiny detail, letting him use his powers to finally crush mithril. These super smooth beats started filling the room, and while everyone was totally vibing to the music, ISO and OR just kept on grinding. The sun was already starting to set when the guy finally stopped to wipe his sweat, only to realize the girls were still staring him down. He asked if they were bored since they'd been watching him since lunch, but they just told him they were totally happy with how things were going. Azo called for Reich to grab a whetstone, and while she was down to help, she was totally shocked that he was skipping the tempering stage. Izo told her the metal was already crazy strong, so there was no point in hardening the perfect slab of mithril he was holding. He was totally blown away by how much better the materials were in this world. And Ezo used his powers and some sneaky tricks to finally conquer that mithril ore. Reich got the grindstone ready, and ISO jumped right in to start grinding. Once the machine took off the extra chunks, he switched to a small whetstone to handle all the tiny. Iso was totally locked in because he knew that if he messed up for even a second, the whole plan would be completely ruined. He couldn't slack off for even a second, staying totally locked in on grinding that mithril while the girls watched him work in total awe. He finally grabs his new mithril sword. He tells everyone the blade is officially ready to go. It's totally flawless without a single scratch on it. The blonde girl skips over to ISO with a huge smile. She's super hyped to test out that brand new sword. ISO hears her out and gives her the green light. He warned her the handle wasn't attached yet, but when Diana picked up the unfinished sword, she was blown away by how light it felt. Izo had heard all the crazy rumors about mithril weapons. People said they were actually as light as a bird's wing. This gear was on a whole different level compared to anything else, Reich. The blonde girl told everyone she was heading outside to test the new weapon, and Diana was totally hyped to see what it could do. A bit later, the whole squad ended up out on the street staring at the blonde girl, but Diana was already dropping into a battle stance and getting her mithril sword ready for action. Suddenly, she takes a swing with the mithril sword, and everyone's dying to know what Diana thinks about using a weapon made of that stuff. Salia was getting seriously creeped out by Diana's scary stares lately, so she finally told the rest of the squad all about it. Urisu and Reich were totally lost on what she meant, so the beast girl worriedly told them that Diana was giving her some really weird looks, even though she didn't. Reich noticed it too, but she wasn't catching the same weird vibes as Sally. That's because Sally is actually a beast man. Her powers let her sense even the smallest change. Celia was totally caught off guard when she heard that. It's like they didn't even care about anyone else's struggles. Right then, Diana bursts into the room. Celia totally freaked out when she suddenly appeared and ran to Izo for help. But he wouldn't even change the subject while Diana just smiled and stared at the beast girl. Salia spent a good while trying to explain why she was so freaked out. Diana was totally lost when she heard people were talking about her weird looks. But then it finally clicked, and she understood. Diana finally gets why Salia is so worried and says sorry to the beast girl. She bows down low, practically begging for her forgiveness. Sally is totally shocked that she's actually doing. The beast girl was totally lost on why Diana kept saying sorry. She got all nervous and asked what was actually up. Diana's face turned bright red. She looked away, super embarrassed, and finally, Diana was actually just staring because she thought Saleya was super cute. Saleya's jaw hit the floor when she heard that. Everyone else was just relieved that the drama was actually nothing serious. Diana kept on talking, telling Celia she looked totally adorable with those fluffy ears, her sharp tail, and that super soft-looking fur. Diana knew that grabbing people without asking was a total no-go. She also knew Celia was completely against it. That's why she was staring at the animal girl so hard. Celia was super embarrassed. Salia finally caved and let Diana pet her fluffy animal ears. Diana was absolutely loving it and couldn't be happier. Everyone else totally got the vibe and felt the same way. Even Diana swings her mithril sword with insane speed and precision. The blade catches the sun, flashing bright and looking totally epic. She moves so smoothly it's like she's actually dancing with the... Iso recognized her sword style instantly because it reminded him of someone he used to know. He scowled as the memories started flooding back. He couldn't help but picture the sad, lonely shadow of... Iso realized that weapons are just tools for taking lives, and it doesn't matter what kind they are because they all have the exact same deadly purpose. The guy's words actually forced Deanna to stop fusing with her sword, and Iso realized that a light blade is way easier to handle. Diana was hyped that he actually noticed. Since the sword was super light, she didn't have to waste any energy just holding it. This made it way easier for her to move fast and... Suddenly, the blonde girl hears her name called as Rick and Celia show up with a piece of the tree so she can try to slice him with a mithril sword. Izu was totally down for the experiment too. Now Diana had to get ready to wreck that tree. The blonde girl dropped into her battle stance. She pointed her mithril sword right at the... Suddenly, the girl takes a massive swing at the tree with her mithril sword. The blade slices right through the wood like it's butter. Diana can't believe her eyes. Rake and Celia just stood there in a daze, watching everything the girls were doing. Diana was still totally shocked, but she managed to snap out of it and yanked the sword right. Diana was totally hyped because she sliced right through that block without even feeling it, proving she's finally leveled up her strength. The girl showed Iso the sword to see how it held up after the test. He saw that the blade wasn't bent or messed up at all after what Diana did. There wasn't any evidence of a link between the two. The black-haired guy wasn't finished yet, and told Diana he had one more test for her. Reich challenged her to slice through a whole metal coil using a mithril sword. Suddenly, the blonde girl swings her mithril sword again and slices right through a metal coil like it's nothing. Diana and Reich were totally floored by what they were seeing. They stared at that mithril sword in pure awe. I mean, even after that insane attack, the blade didn't have a single... The guy stood there totally frozen, finally realizing that a blade can be used to save someone just as easily as it can end them. Iso was totally baffled by the sword, and the guy just stood there staring, completely speechless. He realized he'd finally pulled off something he never thought was possible, which left the girls... He just stood there, totally stunned by the mithril sword he'd just crafted. He could see his own wide-eyed face reflecting right back at him in the shiny metal. Seeing his own... But it wasn't all fun and games, because he saw some really dark things happening to regular people. Iso just stood there, gripping his sword in total silence. Ezo didn't think one sword could wreck the whole world, but since he usually just made basic steel weapons, he knew a super strong mithril blade in the wrong hands would be. This mithril weapon is basically indestructible and slices through solid rock like butter, so once you pick it up, absolutely nothing can get in your way. He just realized this sword might actually decide the fate of the entire world one day. The thought totally blew his mind. He had no clue he could even make something this powerful, so he knew he had. Iso was totally shook. His face went pale as the truth finally hit him. Now he had to make the big choice on who gets the sword. The guy stayed quiet for so long that the girls started getting really nervous. Suddenly, Salia stepped in and broke the awkward silence. The beast girl called out to Issa, sounding totally... He was still totally stuck in his head, realizing that forging a mithril sword felt way different than making blades for Helen. One line out. If the input is 3 sentences, I should probably output 3 sentences on one line. Let's try. This black-haired guy knew Iso was totally stressed and needed to tell someone, so he walked right up to a group of 3 girls. Reich let out a huge sigh of relief when her master finally looked back at them, and now every girl was totally locked in, waiting to hear what he'd say next. With everyone staring him down, Azil went totally silent, feeling a massive rush of excitement while trying to hide his nerves from the girls. He managed to ask them about selling the sword, but Iso looked super nervous as he stared at the mithril blade he just made. The girls didn't say a word, just waiting for him to keep going. Azo didn't get a reply, so he just kept on talking. He warned them that if the wrong people... Iso was freaking out about selling the sword to the wrong person, and he was literally dripping with sweat from the stress. He couldn't even process the fallout of his massive choice, and even though the stress was totally wrecking him, Izu still found the guts to tell the girls what was on his... The girls went dead silent after hearing that, and in the awkward quiet, Iso felt like a total loser for dumping his drama on them, especially since he's actually a 40-year-old man. Isaac knew that showing his weak side might make the girls leave him forever, but he just couldn't help himself. This guy had made some epic gear before, but this sword was just on a whole other level. Izo was actually pretty worried and told the rest of the group. It got super quiet for a soft giggle snaps him right back to reality. He's totally shocked because they aren't reacting the way he thought they would. Instead, the girls just start laughing. They're actually happy. The girls weren't let down by ISO at all because they totally got that making such epic gear meant he'd be obsessed with every little detail, and ISO just stared at them in. Reich was just a dwarf, so the girl was sure her master Izo would never even dream of doing something like this. But she still totally understood where he was coming from since every blacksmith feels. She's felt this way since she was a little kid, so she just assumed every creator in the world was going through the exact same thing. The creator isn't a mind reader, so he has no clue if a hero or a total psycho will end up with his blade. And since a blacksmith can't control what, the black-haired guy was totally shocked that his crew actually had his back. He couldn't stop thinking about what they just said. Then, out of nowhere, Celia shouted out to Izo too. Celia told him to just open up whenever things got tough since they're family, and the rest of the girls were totally on board. Isle was totally blown away by how much they were backing him up. Hearing them talk about his family made his face turn bright red. Their kind words really hit him deep and made him feel. The guy was super embarrassed as he thanked the girls for everything, bowing his head low to show them some major respect. A single tear of pure joy hit the ground. Izo felt totally embarrassed that their support actually made him cry. He desperately tried to hide his bright red face. The girls saw him and just gave. Everyone suddenly lunged at Iso and squeezed him in a massive group hug, totally catching him off guard. He realized the girls weren't even mad about him being a coward, and for the first time, he actually felt amazing as those tight hugs warmed him up and put a huge, thankful smile on. A little while later, Iso slapped his cheeks to snap back to reality, and he was finally feeling way better. The girls were just happy the guy finally got his head on straight. Huge smiles broke out across their faces. In this world, Izo was actually the creator. That was literally his job. He's gonna build exactly what he wants. Not just for himself, but for every single one of his clients, no matter who they are. Check the isolation rule. Each line must be a complete thought. Never spill the meaning of one line into the next. If I treat the input as 3 separate lines, with the girls backing him up, the guy finally got his confidence back and started bragging to Celia, but she totally shut him down. Everyone started cracking up at how weird the whole thing was, and they couldn't stop smiling. Iso finally realized that as long as his friends were with him, he could take on the world. He just wanted a happy future with his family, so when a few people walked back into the house, Iso promised the girls they'd go out for food right after he finished working on his. The next day they finally started the last step of making the guards and handles. Mithril was way too hard to shape, so they used steel for those parts instead. Iso even snuck. The mithril rapier was finally finished, and it looked totally perfect from the handle all the way to the blade. Ezo scanned the blade for any tiny mistakes, but it was totally flawless, so he handed it over to Rika to represent the dwarves, while Reich just stood there looking at it in total awe. Izo was finally hyped and ready to jump back into the action without a second thought. He headed out and showed off his custom weapon to the seller. The shop owner was totally blown away by. That mithril rapier landed right in Camillo's shop, where Ezo scored some major intel about this world from the seller, and got a direct order from the Count to fix a halberd. Camillo says there's no massive war or invasion happening, but monsters are still causing trouble at the borders, and word on the street is that people are starting to turn on each other. Izo headed out with the girls, dragging a wooden cart full of gear while the squad stayed on high alert to keep him safe. Diana was totally ready for action. She kept her eyes peeled, searching every corner for her target. Azo saw her moving all weird and asked Celia what was going on, then the animal. So it turns out Diana was actually looking for a wolf cub this whole time. She somehow managed to run right into this specific one. And lately, he's been showing up around their place way wide. They even ran into a mama wolf and her tiny pups. Diana has been acting like that ever since. Seeing those adorable wolf babies totally made her day. She was desperate to get another look at them. Celaya knew the truth too, but she kept it a secret from Diana because she knew the blonde girl would never be happy with it. Yuzia realized what was up and agreed it was way better to keep the warrior in the dark. Meanwhile, Reich was scrambling to give Diana a heads up. She'd completely forgotten she was even supposed to be looking for the cubs. Before long, the whole group finally made their way back home. It's been a minute, but then this random girl suddenly walks up to their house, pulls back her hood with a nervous sigh, and gives the wooden door a soft knock. Everyone heard a knock, so the guy rushed to the door and swung it open, totally shocked to see a complete stranger standing there. Suddenly, a super cute girl with elf ears pops up right in front of him, nervously clutching a bundle while staring straight at Iso. Izzo was totally stunned by how this stranger looked, but once he saw those pointy ears, he realized she was an elf asking if this place was his forge. The black-haired guy says yes, and the elf is totally hyped because she's actually got a huge favor to ask him. Iso let a surprise guest into the house. He wanted to talk about everything right then and there. The girl agreed and thanked him for the invite. Once she was inside, Iso even handed her a drink. She hooked him up with a drink, and after the stranger thanked her, Iso got straight to the point and asked why she even showed up at his place. The blonde elf shows him a bundle and unwraps it, leaving the guy totally shocked to see a sword that's basically shattered into pieces. Alfika sadly told everyone that the weapon was actually a mithril sword. Even though it was made of that legendary metal, it was completely shattered and broken. This random stranger wanted Ezo to be the... He agreed with her and noticed that even though the blade was super thin, it was actually as long as a massive broadsword. The guy asks her how she wants the sword fixed, and the elf says she really wants it back to normal, but she's totally cool if that's just not possible. Iso was shocked that the girl wanted to fully restore the sword. He asked the stranger if she'd really come all this way by herself. She told him that, yeah, she was totally alone. He didn't care at all, and once he realized I was just checking if she was alone, the guy finally let out a massive sigh of relief. Ezo suddenly announced he was taking the job, making the elf totally freak out in shock, and his loud shout was so intense it actually made the guy jump. She snapped out of it and started apologizing like crazy for yelling, while the guy realized she was a total newbie and asked when she needed the order finished. The elf really needed this job finished as fast as possible. He gave them a strict 2-week deadline to get it done. Iso didn't hesitate and agreed to all her terms. Right then, the front door swings wide open. Iso is totally hyped to see the girls getting back. Diana and Celaya shout that they're finally home, but then Diana stops dead. 2 girls spotted Elfika and were totally stunned by how gorgeous she was, staring at the blonde elf like they couldn't believe their eyes. Izo explained exactly why this elf had suddenly shown up at their forge. She actually came to the house because she needed her sword fixed. The girl then introduced herself to the whole group, after giving a... Diana introduced herself too, telling Lee D she was Iso's assistant at the blacksmith shop, and then she actually curtsied. Celia was totally shocked by Diana's fancy manners, so... Diana's heart totally melted seeing Salia look so flustered, while Rika introduced herself to Lady as a student from ISO. Iso told the girl that these people were actually his family. Then, Lady had one more favor to ask. She wanted to watch them work on her sword every single day. She knew she was asking. Iso saw how much that sword meant to her and let her keep it, and the blonde elf was honestly so thankful. Then she asked if she could just crash in a corner of his garden. She planned to stay there while she worked on fixing her sword. Isa was totally shocked by her next request. I mean, Liddy had no clue why he was acting so stressed. She could feel the magic in the air getting crazy thick. Since it was so intense, there was no way anyone would dare to come close. Isa's jaw hit the floor when he heard her. He just stood there, totally frozen, staring at the elf. She explained that their house was basically a massive magnet for magic. Lady thought Izo picked this spot for a reason, but the guy was actually clueless and just chose the place at random. The elf girl was totally shocked because after seeing Azo strike that rapier earlier, she was 100% sure he was using some high-level local magic. Lydia was totally blown away and couldn't figure out how he was doing any of it. Iso got all flustered and embarrassed by what she said. He awkwardly told her it. The elf was feeling totally weirded out by her own thoughts about him. Izo felt pretty bad and apologized in his head for lying to her. Right then, he realized his special ability. If Lydia's right, the magic in the capital was way too weak for Izo to forge another insane mithril masterpiece like he did here. Iso quickly changed the subject, and since he couldn't just leave the girl outside, he let her crash in the guest room while the other girls totally played it cool. Liddy was totally shocked he'd just let her move in when he already had 3 wives, but Izo and the girls were completely floored when she actually brought them up. Azo looked totally bummed out as he told Liddy they were just family, not his wives, and he realized Camillo was the one spreading all those crazy rumors. Lydia felt totally cringe after saying something so dumb. The other girls were still absolutely fuming about what just happened. Iso finally let out a massive sigh of relief. The whole misunderstanding was finally. Diana suddenly had a huge realization. She was totally hyped thinking they were all going to live with the elf now. But Iso quickly set her straight, explaining the elf was only staying until the sword was... The girls were totally hyped to see the elf hanging out at their place. The guy just stood there feeling super awkward while they cheered for him. Then he let everyone know that it was finally time for dinner. All he wanted to do after the meal was crash and get some rest. Salia told Iso they were actually eating a massive leafy falcon for their feast. Izo told Diana and Rika to get a room ready for Liddy, while he and Salia started cooking that crazy 5-winged bird, but then Salia suddenly called out to him. Aizu suddenly remembered that elves don't eat meat, but a blonde elf cut in right as things were getting awkward. She asked if she could help out with the cooking, and even though Iso was about to say no because elves are usually vegetarian, Liddy revealed she's actually a pro at plucking birds. So Talia was totally shocked because she thought elves only ate veggies, but it turns out she was dead wrong. Aizo felt super awkward since he was thinking the exact same thing. Lady didn't even care though. She'd heard that same old stereotype a million times before. Honestly, elves usually just... Iso was pretty shocked to find stereotypes even in another world. But Liddy confirmed that elves are actually huge meat-eaters who hunt deer and birds in the forest. Potatoes are basically their whole diet since the elves grow them in the fields, and even though fishing isn't really a thing there, someone still tries it every once in a while. Othoda was a smart guy who knew a big village couldn't just survive on hunting, so after the elf explained things, he let her help him cook the bird. Letty was totally hyped that he agreed. She couldn't help but flash a huge smile. After a bit, the leafy falcon was finally finished. The whole table smelled absolutely incredible. The next morning, the whole crew met up at the forge. They all stared at Leverlagui's shattered blade, trying to figure out a plan. The massive job of fixing this guy was 100% locked in on his work. He used his powers to control the heat of the flames perfectly. Iso realized that using more steel would just wreck the broken sword even worse. Once you fuse these materials, it's almost impossible to get the blade back to its original power and sharpness. Ezo wasn't worried one bit since he was working with a sword made of... This dark-haired guy knew fixing the weapon was going to be a total nightmare, but he got straight to work anyway because he was determined to bring that shattered sword back to life. The blacksmith started heating up his tools, and that's when Lidi noticed Mr. Izzo was actually using magic while he worked. The guy didn't even try to hide it, admitting he can use magic, but it's just basic stuff like starting fires or cooling them with the wind, and Lidi was hanging on his every word. She knew for a fact that this took some serious training to pull off. It made no sense that this guy didn't know the first thing about the magic in this area. A cold. Iso was totally creeped out by her staring, and that smile of hers was straight up terrifying. He couldn't just admit he literally just got these powers, or that his friends are totally... He grabbed some tongs to line up the broken blade while his student Reich helped out. Both of them totally locked in as Iso started hammering the pieces back together. Reich held the broken sword pieces steady, while Izzo worked to fuse them back together. He landed perfectly timed hits right on the cracks to lock the metal in place. Bonding regular steel is actually way tough. Azo could have used a special tool, but it would have messed up the temperature and left him no time for hammering, so he decided to just do the whole thing by hand. Everyone was totally locked in. The rhythmic clanging of hammers echoed through the entire room. Reich jumped in to help the guy fix up the blade. But then E-Zone realized the heat was... He told her right away that this mission was the perfect chance to finally break the sword, and the elf's face dropped because she was terrified for her weapon. She rushed over to the blacksmith, praying he could fix her blade. For a second, Lady actually thought her sword was a total goner. Ezo got all flustered because she was... Lady let out a massive sigh of relief the moment she heard Izo's answer. Her sword was finally going to be fixed. Aizo saw her reaction and just smirked. He really wanted... He realized he had to be way more careful with that weapon, and jumped right back into training with Reich. His eyes started glowing like crazy while he worked his magic. Lady caught him right in the act. She was totally blown away that he could actually see the flow of magic. Ezo had no idea. Liddy explains that he's using his hammer to sync up with the magic flow, and suddenly it clicks for ISO. He was actually just trying to keep those glowing particles from falling apart. She rushed right back at him since he could actually see magic, and Ezo totally flinched when she got in his face. Ezo was totally flustered because she was way too close, so she apologized and then calmly told him that he can actually see magic power. The blonde girl was super hyped that she finally proved this guy actually had magic. He could see the power the whole time, he just didn't realize what it was. It finally clicked. That light was actually a burst of magic, and as the guy stared at the split sword, he saw tiny particles flickering inside the blade. Iso noticed he wasn't just seeing magic power, but something even crazier. Liddy was just glad they were finally done with all those annoying questions. Iso thanked her for finally explaining what was going. After a bit, the guy took a close look at Lady's mithril sword, because something about it just felt wrong. So, Azo decided to fire up his special ability. Suddenly, his... A massive footprint suddenly appeared right where the sword pieces joined up, and the guy realized there were actually gaps in the blade's joints. The sword looked totally fixed on the outside, but magic was leaking through the joints, and Iso knew it wouldn't last much longer in a fight. This guy was so wiped out that he didn't even see it coming. Eso knew he had to find a way to fix this mess fast. He stood there racking his brain, trying. Iso showed the blonde girl the chip in her blade, and Lidi spotted magic power leaking right out of the gaps in the sword's joints. Reich couldn't even see the magic energy anyway. It made her feel totally out of place. Salia and Diana had no clue what was happening with this case. They just stood there watching. Iso knew this was a bad sign, and Lady was totally on the same page, realizing that just fixing the sword's shape wasn't going to be enough this time. If Iso lands just a few more hammer hits in those exact spots, the magic might finally start flowing again, and Lady is totally shocked by his sudden offer. Isa told the elf to just fix the sword back to normal, and the guy let her decide if she wanted to go through with the repair. She sat there thinking, because this wasn't something she could just rush into, and since it was such a tough call with everyone staring at her in total silence, Lydia finally made her big move. She stepped up and asked him to fix both her sword's shape and its magic flow, totally sticking with that first choice. Iso totally saw this coming, and knew the elf would pick this because just fixing the sword's shape wasn't going to be enough, so that's why Lady put her trust in. All she cares about is being able to use her sword just like before. She was honestly freaking out about her weapon. To her, it was the only thing that was truly perfect. Iso totally understood what she was going through. He flashed a smile and told Lady she could count on him for anything. His confidence was so contagious that she finally stopped worrying and calmed down. Now, Aizo got right back to work, slapping his own face to lock in because he knew this next job was going to be a total nightmare. There was no way he was going to let Liddy down. He'd already given her his word that he'd fix the blade for good. Plus, he couldn't let his family. They got right back to the grind, tossing the shattered sword onto the glowing coals while Ricky used dry grass to keep the fire at the perfect heat, and then Izo and Rick teamed. The sword pieces slowly started to merge, so they wrapped the blade in straw, blasted it with heat, and kept on hammering as the rhythmic clanging echoed through the whole forge. This guy was totally locked in and didn't lose focus for a second. Every single strike he landed was perfectly timed and packed a serious punch. They gathered up the mithril scraps, hammered them down. Bright and early the next morning, the whole crew was back in the forage room and getting straight back to work. Diana and Celia were just out picking fruit when S.O. suddenly froze after a single strike, staring at his sword in shock as he realized his body felt way heavier. Aizo calls out to Liddy, and as she looks over, he tells her the sword is surging with magic and getting way heavier. The blonde elf stared hard at her sword, finally agreeing with the guy and feeling hyped that Iso was actually a total pro at magic. The guy was totally losing it because the magic was making the mithril way heavier, and he had no idea this metal could even do that. That thin sword he made didn't feel like this at all, probably because the metal was way purer, but they had to keep grinding anyway. Iso never noticed this before, but the harder he swings this blade, the more magic power builds up, making the mithril get way stronger with every single hit. Iso was sweating buckets because this fix was way tougher than usual, and he had to lock in with all his strength to get it done. Time slipped away until the sky turned a fiery red, and the worn-out guy finally decided to just pack it in and finish the repairs tomorrow. This repair is going to take him way longer to finish. He downs a cold drink to chill out after all that hard work. Out of nowhere, someone calls out to him. Celia finally made it back home, but she told him her bag totally ripped on the way. The girl from the animal quest asked for a hand picking up her stuff, and Iso had to rush off to help Samia, leaving Rick to clean the forge, but Liddy jumped in to help the dwarf so he wasn't stuck doing it all by himself. Azo and Samia finally made it to the spot in the woods, and that's when Azo spotted Diana. She was creeping around, searching for something in total silence. She was make it more YouTube narrator. Savior saw the sign and instantly knew what was going down. Diana was totally locked in and looking super restless. And then out of nowhere, Sally starts digging through her bag, clearly looking for something, when she suddenly tosses out a piece of jerky. The puppies rush over to it instantly, with one letting out a big bark while Diana's face turned bright red the second she saw those cubs. Seeing those adorable puppies totally hyped her up. She almost let out a huge scream because they were so cute. Sally just sat, with their fluffy ears, wagging tails, and big dark eyes. These puppies were way too adorable. Everything about them was just super cute. Even So had to admit they were precious. Diana suddenly locks eyes with one specific puppy, and the little wolf yaps right back at her because he's having a total blast. Right then, Iso's hand gets squeezed super hard. He winces and shuts his eyes tight because it hurts so much. He's got no clue why Diana is suddenly crushing his shoulder. Right then, the pup tilted its head, and Diana started blushing like crazy because he was just too adorable to handle. The girl was totally losing it because of how sweet he was. She was so hyped that she started playfully punching him in the arm. Poor Ezo just had to sit there and take Diana's side. A bit later, the girls and the guy finally head back to the house. Izo is lugging a heavy bag of loot on his shoulder, which is still pretty sore from the fight. The dark-haired guy caught Reich and Lydie acting super close, so they cut their secret chat short just to say hello. Lydie tried her best to teach the dwarf how to tap into his magic, but Reich was totally lost on how she could even feel the magic moving. Lydie told him that dwarves are actually supposed to. Since Lydie was crashing at their place, she offered to teach Rika how to use magic, and Iso was totally cool with his student learning some new tricks. Honestly, he was super. He knew his reading skills were so bad that he wouldn't learn a single thing. But Reich was a totally different story. She listened super closely and picked up everything instantly. This is Reich's big chance to craft a legendary weapon and finally find the courage to head back home. While everyone watches Lydie train Rika, Diana is actually feeling pretty jealous that such a... Suddenly, the guy finally remembered. By then, it was already getting super late. The dark sky was covered in bright, twinkling stars. That's when Iso shot some weird material straight out of... Dizzo let out a massive yawn, totally wiped out while thinking about the materials he picked. He wasn't even sure if this stuff was actually good enough for what he was building. Then he scanned. Then Iso started carving up some wood while humming a chill tune, his hands moving in a total blur as he whittled it down. Morning finally rolled around. The sun was up and the whole sky was glowing. Iso didn't sleep a wink and was still grinding away at his work. He built a little wooden shelf and hooked. So the guy actually built a Shinto altar. It looked a bit weird, but for a guy from Japan, it was good enough. This was definitely going to help Iso feel more. He took a second to wonder what the other gods would think, really hoping they'd actually like his new design. At the same time, a bunch of girls were just waking up. They were all smiles as they headed over to the sinks to get cleaned up. Celia made her way over to the forge. A bunch of girls walked over and started staring at the guy, and since Iso noticed they were dying to know what he was up to, he just gave them a friendly good morning, He told them he was just performing a ritual for the gods from his home up north. The guy was actually half lying about what he was really up to. Diana was just super happy that Iso explained that back in his home, people believe even the smallest house can be a temple for gods and spirits, and the girls were totally blown away by this wild northern tradition. Iso explained that this was a tradition only people from his homeland really did. Celia asked him if she could try it out for herself. Lydie didn't want to be left out and said, "The guy starts breaking down the rules of how to pray." The girls totally catch on to everything he's saying. They're super hyped to try out the prayer poses for themselves. He wasn't even sure if God actually existed in this world. But he started praying anyway, thanking him for every single thing. The other girls joined in, folding their hands to pray right. After finishing his prayer, Ezio really hoped a god would finally show up in this world, and then he invited the girls to grab some breakfast. A temple without a master is pretty much useless, but if someone's actually there, they could help him finish the job or even join the hunt. Azo's basically praying for a miracle, just wanting his family to never go hungry so they can finally be happy and safe. The whole crew met back up at the forge. The dark-haired guy told the girls he was getting back to work. He started handing out everyone's jobs. Reich was on blade duty. Zoe spends the next few days grinding away at the mithril, determined to get that sword back to its original form. Working with mithril takes insane focus. If Ezo isn't using his brain, the whole thing's a bust. One swing that's just a bit too hard and magic would make his life way easier, but Izo wouldn't be a real blacksmith if he just leaned on powers. Hardly anyone in this world is skilled enough to work with mithril, but this guy was slamming his hammer down on the rare metal, and even though it was tough, every strike sounded. The guy took a quick breather to grab some water and asked Lady if she liked watching him do his thing. Normal blacksmithing is usually a total snooze fest, but Iso's work was anything but ordinary, and Lydie loved it so much that he thanked her for the sweet compliment. She kept right on talking, and since time flies when you're an immortal elf, she never gets bored just hanging out and watching Iso work. The three girls were totally hyped by what the blonde elf said, staring at Linity like she was a total legend. Esau felt super awkward when he realized Lini was way older than she looked, since elves live for hundreds of years. Lady admitted she totally loved the sound of Isa working at the forge, since no blacksmith back in the elf village could make it sound that awesome. The guy was shocked because the forge sounded totally different from any other blacksmith he'd ever heard. It turns out that if you use magic the right way, mithril actually makes a much cooler sound. Basically, the more magic a blacksmith knows, the cooler the metal sounds while they're hammering away. Leody couldn't stop hyping up Iso for his insane skills. The guy was honestly... That pep talk from the elf really lit a fire under Isaiah. He actually did it. He pumped magic straight into the mithril. All that sweating and grinding finally paid off. But he knew To keep the forge crew from losing their fire, they all took a day off to recharge, and the girls had a blast fishing outside. The dark-haired guy was actually happy to see his crew taking a break. He really cared about doing things the right way. And if you're gonna work hard, you've gotta... It's been a minute since we last checked in. Izo is back to his usual routine, hauling massive jugs of water from the river. He's feeling way better after finally getting some. He froze solid the second he saw what was happening. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene. His eyes were wide open, totally shocked by what he was looking at. Iso spots this blonde elf standing there. She lightly taps a tree trunk with her hand. Suddenly, insane magic starts glowing and swirling all around her. Then, she turns her head and looks right at him. He gave Liddy a super awkward wave and asked what she was even doing out there since it's pretty dangerous. But Liddy totally got that and made sure to stay far away from any monsters. Asu warns everyone that a monster might show up, but Lady brushes it off since she's 100% sure she's safe there. She had no clue anyone in these woods could actually transform into a beast. Honestly, the nature here isn't even supposed to change. The blonde elf warned him that if monsters start popping up, there's probably a cave with stale magic nearby, and Iso totally got what she was saying. He finally figured out that's exactly why that crazy bear attacked right then. Then Imezo told Ladidi she should turn this whole spot into a nature park. But she actually didn't. He was totally on board with her, but the big thing was making sure they were ready for action as he looked down at them. He asked her what she was even doing out in the woods, but her face totally dropped the second he said it. Inzo saw the vibe shift and immediately tried to backtrack, telling her. The blonde girl just stood there totally silent for a second. She looked like she was really hesitating to say anything. But Ligadati told him she was actually just building up her magic power. Letty explains that elves need to absorb magic just like food, making Iso realize why they're so rare in other cities. And with that mystery solved, he gets ready to leave the forest. The blonde elf was definitely not feeling his reaction. Her face went totally ice cold in a second. She just stared the guy down with a serious look. Then she called out for Iso. She sounded totally cold as she grilled him with more questions about absorbing magic, making it obvious she didn't trust this guy one bit. Enzo was totally done with the questions because he'd already heard everything he needed, and Lady didn't have to say another word. Izo just headed inside and left the elf behind, leaving Lady totally stunned by his words. But she felt a warm sense of relief because he still hadn't figured out the truth. Fast forward a bit and the whole crew is already back at the forge. Iso lets everyone know it's time to get back to the grind. And honestly, nobody even tries to argue. It's finally time for the home stretch, and Iso grabs his hammer to put the finishing touches on Lady's sword. While he's working, the guy catches Lady's attention with a sudden question. He asks her how her sword ended up getting totally shattered. Right away, she goes pale as those... Iso didn't actually push the girl. He was just super curious about what could snap a material that strong because he wants to forge a sword that's basically unbreakable. Liddy finally starts explaining what happened. But since magic shattered her sword, she's keeping the details vague, and she warns that to truly master mithril, you have to pump your own mana straight into the blade. The guy was totally blown away when he heard about that method. Lee didn't stop there and kept her story going. Everyone in her village treated her sword like a massive deal. But then, the magic was way too intense, and the sword just snapped into pieces. The elf looked totally crushed when she heard that. Now she needs a legendary blacksmith who can fix it and make it just... Then, the guy thanked Letty for explaining why the weapon totally failed. After a real heart-to-heart, Izo got right back to work fixing the gear. The guy was still busy fixing up the sword. He only had 2 weeks left until his big deadline. He was grinding like crazy to get it finished in time. The girls kept their eyes glued to him as Iso flexed his powers to make the fix look absolutely perfect. After a while, the mithril sword was finally finished, and the exhausted guy looked at his work with a proud smile, while everyone hyped up the successful repair. Ezo calls Liddy over and hands her a sword to check out, while the nervous elf slowly creeps toward the blade. She looked over the weapon Ace had just fixed. The other girl watched the elf closely, waiting to see how she'd react. Suddenly, Lady broke into a huge grin. She was totally hyped with... The blonde girl gave everyone a huge thank you, especially since Izo made the sword way cooler than she ever expected. The three of them started cheering like crazy because they finally pulled off the elf. Izo felt like he totally overdid it with the restoration, so the black-haired guy was already planning to just scrap the sword and start over. Liddy sees the blacksmith looking worried and just gives him a sweet smile, telling Tom that the sword he fixed is actually way more magical than the original version thanks to all his hard work. Iso finally let out a massive sigh of relief, just stoked that she actually liked everything. But then, Lady brought up the payment, and suddenly she was the one starting to stress out. Liddy just gave a sweet smile, feeling totally chill with how simple he was, and then she held out her hands to show him what she had. The elf tried to pay the blacksmith with just 5 gold coins and some wood. Liddy felt super awkward about it. Izo had totally gone above and beyond for her. She really wanted to. Aiza was awkwardly trying to do the math on the price. The girl had actually brought all the supplies herself. Right then, a light bulb went off in his head. He reached out and handed. Iso gave the elf a mission to trade that gold coin for some veggie seeds from her village, and as long as it's not a hassle, she just needs to drop them off with Camillo. The lady was totally caught off guard by what he asked. The seats were actually super cheap and didn't even cost half a gold coin. But the guy refused to take any of his money back. The blonde elf was totally blown away by how nice Izo was, bowing low to thank him while he just gave her a super warm smile. It was finally time for Liddy to pack up and head out. Asa and the rest of the girls all crowded around to say their goodbyes. Holding her sword tight, the elf thanked everyone. She flashed a huge grin and told him she had a total blast hanging out. The other girls all beamed back with massive smiles of their own. They were just super hyped that their guest was actually having a bunch of girls rushed over to say goodbye, making Liddy promise to teach them sword fighting and elf magic later on. Hearing that, the girl realized she could visit whenever she wanted, not just for work, and Izo totally agreed, flashing a big smile as he said goodbye and made her promise to tell everyone how awesome their forge is. Once they finished fixing that elven rapier at Iso's forge, the crew went back to their boring daily routine. But eventually, Isos headed back to Camillo's lava, where the shop. Azo just rolled into the city and heard some wild rumors about a gang of thieves, so he hit up Camillo to get the full scoop. So, this thief actually broke into someone's home. But the crazy part is, the family only ended up with a few scratches. This mysterious guy didn't steal a single thing and Azo thought the whole thing felt super sketchy, and even though Diana's first guess was Carol, it just didn't seem like something she'd actually do. If Carol actually had pros like that, he would have hired them way sooner, and both Iso and Camillo totally agreed with her. Even though Azo's place is still in one piece, the girls are staying super careful while they hang out in the office drinking tea, until Camillo suddenly remembers something major. The shopkeeper tells Azo he's got a creature that looks just like a horse, and the second he hears that word, Azo starts remembering what a real animal actually looks like. They needed an extra horse for all the heavy hauling coming up, and then Camillo led the whole group straight to the essence. Iso and the girls completely froze the second they saw the monster Camillo was talking about. While the girls were shocked, Iso was straight up losing his mind. This thing Camillo showed them the creature let out a super cute purr when it saw them, but Camillo told everyone it wasn't a horse at all. It was actually a straight up running dragon. Even though they called it a dragon, this runner was actually just a lizard. It had these super sharp eyes that caught everything. He and Diana were totally glued to the little guy as it zoomed around. The dragon looked back mid-run with a super confused face. Diana's heart totally melted because it was just so adorable. Her face turned bright red as she started playfully punching the guy. While Diana keeps whacking his shoulder in excitement, he asks Camillo what this dragon even eats, and the shopkeeper tells them it's not picky at all since it'll chow down on meat, veggies, grain, or even just plain old grass. Izo finally got the full picture since he never had to worry about food at home, and when the guy asked how many times the dragon had eaten, Camillo admitted they'd barely had a bite. This running dragon barely even touched its food. Diana thought the little guy was the cutest thing ever. Izo was just confused why the man didn't want to keep such an awesome pet. Camillo points out that a dragon is gonna look way too obvious sitting in a stable. It's not like it's gonna blend in with a bunch of regular horses. Izo saw what was up and agreed to take the beast, making Camillo grin ear to ear, but the shop owner quickly warned them that this running dragon was gonna be super expensive. The dark-haired guy wasn't even sweating it, promising to pay for the dragon later, and since Camillo was totally fine with that, he started getting all the gear ready. After that, the guy headed out to grab some gear for the running dragon while humming a chill little tune. Iso just watched him go with a big smile on his face. Diana really wanted to reach out. The blonde girl reaches out and touches the dragon while it's full-on sprinting, and it doesn't even try to stop her. Diana pressed her hand right against the dragon and was totally hyped by how warm he felt. Right then, the dragon finally chilled out and let the girl reach out to pet him right under his chin. Milo's dragon let out a happy little purr, showing that the newest member of the family was finally feeling right at home. Diana's face turned bright red again because of how sweet he was being. Now all the other girls wanted to pet the adorable running dragon too. They all walked up and started giving him some gentle. A bit later, the whole crew is piled into a wooden cart full of gear, which is being pulled along by a massive sprinting dragon, while Rick sits up front to steer. Iso asked Reich about the dragon, and it turns out the beast was a pro at pulling the cart, especially since their new family member was driving fast without even shaking the ride. The dragon was chilling while pulling the cart like it was nothing. Iso was super impressed by how easy he made it look. He was already planning to train their new pet as soon as they got home. Ezo says they seriously need to train the new guy because he keeps zooming way too fast while they're traveling. Diana realized he was comparing this ride to the time he hid in Camilo's carriage. But Celia was worried the wagon would break under the weight, so they definitely need to boost how much. They reached the forest in record time, cutting their trip in half compared to walking, and they were honestly pretty hyped about it. That dragon didn't get tired for even a second, and even though Iso felt way more chill in the forest, he still wasn't letting his guard down around their new pet. Out of nowhere, the cart hit a massive branch, and since the dragon didn't slow down, the whole carriage and everyone inside just launched into the air. Everyone tumbled back inside while Reich apologized, feeling super guilty for slamming them right into a massive tree branch. Everyone was totally fine, but the ride was so bumpy that Ezo promised to fix the wagon's suspension, while the dragon just gave them a mean growl as it ran past. They finally made it back home, and everyone noticed the trip was way faster this time since the sun was still high in the sky. Everyone was hyped because the trip back was way faster now, giving them tons of extra time to finally just hang out and do whatever they wanted. The dark-haired guy grabbed a bucket of water to wash the dragon down after their sprint, and Iso made sure to thank the beast for the ride. The guy starts scrubbing the dragon's body with a cloth before heading off to grab some meat for Tom, and the dragon is vibing so hard with the attention that it starts nuzzling. Irsu knew the dragon could just eat grass, but he really wanted to spoil it, and right then Diana walked up with a tray of meat, totally ready to give their new pet a name. Reich really wanted to know if the dragon was a boy or a girl, but since he had no clue how to tell them apart, he just gave up while Isa asked the others for some better name ideas. Diana told everyone she heard a noble name his horse for the third race, and they were all shocked because the name was so wild you couldn't even remember it. Diana asks Izo for his take, but he doesn't even bother naming the running dragon because he knows his names are always way too hard to say. Salia had a total lightbulb moment when she remembered the dragon was purring the whole time, so she decided his new name should be Urchik. Everyone totally loved Celia's idea because she picked a super cute name that fit their newest family member perfect. Iso was totally down with Sally's idea since the name was super easy to remember. So right then and there, the running dragon became Urchik. Diana gave him a big shout-out for. Once they named their running dragon, everyone headed off to relax while Iso planned to build the new pet a house the very next day. The next morning, a super sleepy Izo heads outside with his jars to grab some water, but he suddenly stops when something catches his eye. Iso spots a dragon just lying right in front of him, and after a tense stare down, he actually says hello and asks if the beast wants to go grab some water with him. The dragon let out a deep rumble like it was totally on board. The guy was caught off guard, but he just turned around and headed back inside. He was just trying to grab a bucket for. Yersu tied a bucket to a rope and looped it over the running dragon's neck, making sure it was super comfy so the beast didn't feel a thing. This dark-haired guy gave his pet some serious love. The pet even leaned its head in for more pats. Then, the two of them started heading down to the river. Urchik. The guy finally realized he could totally trust Urchik after that perfect water run, knowing his dragon needed a good warm-up walk before it could really start sprinting. Today, the whole squad was busy building a brand new home for Urchik. Luckily, they already had a massive pile of wood ready to go. Now, all they had to do was haul. Since they finally got an Earth Girl on the team, hauling wood wasn't even a problem anymore, especially with that running dragon helping them out. Diana was low-key freaking out watching the dragon run, thinking there was no way Tom could carry all that wood. She gave Erichik a look that was half scared and half hyped, but everyone else was just acting totally chill. Urchik wasn't just hauling the heavy wood, he was actually helping them tear down branches too. With Urchik putting in the work, the house building went way faster than anyone. Everyone was super hyped they finally finished a home for their pet, so I told the dragon this cabin was officially his new spot, and Urchik started checking out every corner of his branch. He finally had a dry spot to crash instead of just sleeping outside. The blonde girl was super hyped to have her own place, and even Running Dragon was totally on board. He flopped onto the hay couch looking totally relaxed. Diana's heart melted seeing Urchik so chilled out. She started petting him with a huge smile on her face. Everyone else. I was seriously impressed by how smart their Running Dragon was, and both she and Ezo were totally convinced the beast understood every word they said. The guys stoked they could get Urchik sorted out so quickly. Salia definitely noticed all the effort Ezo was putting in. I mean, the dude was seriously working his tail off. He's still got every single memory from his past life. He uses insane moves and tech that this world hasn't even invented yet. With those cheat code skills, he knew he couldn't just go around breaking the rules of this new world, so Iso had to find a way to make his modern ideas actually work here. A little while later, they headed back to the river to grab some more water. The guy and the kid went back together once again. The Running Dragon was even helping them carry all the water. Then, he had to do this to protect his family and his own back, so he told everyone to focus on fixing the wagon before going back to their normal jobs. The guy told Rika she'd have to start working with metal. She wasn't even stressed about it, though. Iso still felt totally guilty about everything. He knew taking this on would be... The dwarf tried to chill him out and told him he could totally lean on her since she wanted to do her part as a student, and Iso thanked her for having his back. He teamed up with everyone to upgrade the carriage, adding a suspension system so the ride wouldn't be a total bumpy mess. Ezo definitely had the tools for the job, so he boiled some water and dunked the material inside to soften it up before nailing all the bars together. Iso put the front and back wheels together, added springs to the rear, and built a wooden trolley as his first test model. Iso finally finished the prototype and let out a huge sigh of relief, right as Urchik showed up because the dragon was hyped to see if this new wagon could actually handle a high-speed test run. The guy was totally down to let him try, so Iso geared up the Urchik and checked out the cart, placing a bucket of water on top for a quick test where, luckily, With Urchik's helping out, they picked the best prototype from the carts, and now they just had to nail the perfect shape for the suspension. Even with Iso's cheat code knowledge from his past life, they still had to grind like crazy, and he was literally dripping sweat from the effort. He took a quick break and realized humans are actually incredible for building all this from zero without any cheat codes from a past life. Everyone's always looking for a way to make their tough lives a little easier. In a world like this, that's just bound to happen. But then Izo showed up and changed everything. Jewelry. You basically have to fail 100 times just to figure out how to fix the smallest little problems. Check for smart words. Precision might be okay. The guy was hard at work building a wagon. He was already nailing the boards onto the base. Urchik was watching him super closely. Luckily, Izo used his powers to make the... It takes most people 20 years of grinding to get this good, but Iso was low-key scared that these powers weren't actually his. Trying to figure it out was way too much for his brain. He just wanted to stop thinking about it entirely. But then, someone suddenly called out to him. Celia invited the guy over for a fresh meal she just cooked, and as soon as he heard lunch, he dropped everything he was doing on that cart. After grabbing a snack with the girls, Iso told everyone at lunch that the wagon upgrades would be finished in just a few days, and then he'd be back to his usual grind. He made sure to thank Reich for handling all those orders for him. Then he thanked the rest of the crew for helping him out around the house. Reich was super happy to get that shout. She was having a total blast learning how her magic worked, and Iso was just relieved she wasn't getting bored of the grind, while Celia and Diana both noticed that Reich got totally flustered by what they said. She thanked the girls with a bright red face. The guy noticed just how much that compliment made her day. He and Reich stepped into the forge. He immediately started checking out the knives the girl had made. Iso used his special ability to scan her work, and even though they looked familiar, something was different. The teacher was totally blown away by his student's work. He told her she did an incredible job, but Reich wasn't convinced. She knew she still had a long way to go. Reich was obsessed with making the ultimate weapon. Ezo just looked at the girl and gave her a warm smile. He hyped her up by telling her she was definitely going to succeed. Finally, the upgraded wagon was finished, so Iso showed the girl and told everyone to hop in since the Urchik was already good to go. The girls walked up to the carriage and loved how awesome it looked. The seats weren't just pretty, they were actually super soft and comfy. Reich noticed that Ezo even remembered to, once everyone was in, the guy hopped into the driver's seat. He told Erachik it was time to go. The dragon listened and started bolting. Now, The cart was just cruising smoothly. The girls were actually starting to feel totally chill around the guy. Reich, Celia, and Diana were honestly shocked. The carriage wasn't even shaking anymore, so they weren't getting... The dark-haired guy explained that he'd actually added springs to the wheels. Because of those, the wagon barely even shakes anymore. Now the group doesn't have to stress about their luggage. They all sat on the cart in silence for a minute. Everyone was finally chilling and enjoying the smooth ride. Best of all, they didn't have to worry about getting tossed off the cart. Diana was totally vibing with the wind on her face while her dragon purred and cruised right along the path. With travel getting way faster, even one person could haul a massive amount of gear alone. This meant news about their stuff was going to spread like wildfire. Etzo realized right then that this was going to... Isaiah was told he wouldn't make a dent in this world, but now he's watching his own knowledge flip everything upside down, proving that even one small move can change the entire... While the guy was deep in thought about his place in the world, Salia gave Urchik some major props for being such a good boy, and he purred like crazy as they headed off. While Camillo counted the cash, Azo felt a little awkward about getting such a massive discount on the running dragon, but he definitely wasn't about to turn down a deal like that. Camillo told Aso that some broke noble was selling his running dragon for cheap, so Camillo bought it and flipped it to Aso to make a quick profit. Azo finally figured out that Camillo was talking about the empire right next door. Then he took a look at the dragon they were using to travel. This beast was smart, strong, and abai. Camillo was hyped to hear that, but the shopkeeper actually had something else on his mind, because he was dying to ask Aizo about that awesome new wagon he just built. Enzo realized he'd definitely seen that pendant before. There was no way he'd ever miss a detail like that. Now, it's finally time to explain how this card actually... Camillo was totally blown away when he realized the new suspension kept the cart from shaking and let them deliver their stuff way faster. But obviously that suspension could only take so much. It definitely wasn't worth breaking the cart by overstuffing it. Camillo listened closely to the guy's explanation. Right then, Camillo's jaw hit the floor in total shock, but he quickly snapped out of it and demanded to know what Iso just said, especially when Iso told him he might not even have to pay for. Camillo tried his best to stay cool and keep it together. The shopkeeper felt way too guilty to just take that cart for free, so the guy stepped out of the office too. With Camillo gone, Celia noticed the city was suddenly packed with strangers, but Esau knew the real reason why. Camillo says Marius has been grinding to build up the city, even though Tom is stuck constantly fighting off demons at the border. Lately, some sketchy bandits have been causing trouble on the roads. ISO heard rumors that these guys are still out there and haven't been caught yet. After a quick talk with Camillo, they finally started the long walk back home. The whole trip was super quiet and chill. Reich was just relieved they finished their city business while the sun was still up, but out of nowhere, everyone felt... Suddenly, a girl in a hooded raincoat blocks their carriage and warns them that if they don't stop right now, something terrible is going to happen. Iso had no choice but to tell Erichik to stop right there. He suddenly realized the bandit from all those rumors was standing right in front of them. A mysterious woman in a hood was... He whispered to his crew to stay sharp, then low-key scanned the area to see if anyone else was lurking, because even though this bandit seemed alone, he could definitely be part of that dangerous gang. Diana was shocked this bandit hadn't been busted yet, and Iso felt the exact same way, especially since the whole crew had no idea what this guy was even trying to pull. Out of nowhere, a mysterious bandit points her sharp sword right at the dragon while he's running, and he just stares back at her totally confused. Diana jumped up and tried to draw her sword in a total rage, but her friends yelled at her to stop right as the bandit ordered them to hand over all their weapons. Everyone got super tense. Diana was still totally pissed about what the bandit did. The guy popped his ability, his eyes lit up, and he could see her power level. She was a bit... Right suddenly taps the guy to get his attention and tells him to chuck her knife right at the bandit. Aizu didn't even ask why. She just took the job right then and there. The guy suddenly tossed a gun right at the bandit's feet. She picked it up without saying a single... The girl finally showed her face and asked where they got that weapon from. She had a weird pattern painted all over her skin. When the bandits asked that, everyone just froze in place. They were dying. She kept nagging them about the guns, but Isaac shut her down by saying he didn't steal anything because he's the one who actually built it, leaving the bandit totally speechless. Izo kept talking and told her they were heading back to their place, so if she really wanted their product, she had to put that sword away. And surprisingly, the mystery woman actually listened and... Suddenly, the guy just invites the girl to hop into the carriage with them. The bandit was totally stunned by how fast everything was happening, but the guy didn't have all day to wait. After a quiet second, The girl hopped into the cart anyway. She told them she was actually hunting for a weapon with that specific symbol on it. But Iso already mentioned that he's the one who... The bandit girl asks him to forge her a weapon. Iso didn't think she was actually that bad, but everyone else was giving him these super suspicious looks, making him totally hesitate. He agreed to the deal, but he had one major catch. The girl had to show up all by herself at his forge deep in the Black Forest. He gave her the directions to find the